Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 61. Chapter for 61, The Kind and Enthusiastic Hanged Man. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Unlike the past, Derek was clearly smarter. He didn't clumsily rely only on words to provide a description. After receiving Mr. Fool's permission, he conjured a series of scenes from the memories that he could recall. He showed the exploratory process and the points he found important to the hanged man, justice, the magician, and the world in a fragmented fashion, and then he included some explanations for them. The walls that had collapsed in the darkness, the streets that passed through the destroyed buildings, the stone pillar-propped white and blue ancient temple that was covered in dust under the light of the animal hide lantern, the statue that hung upside down from a pitch-black cross, the series of murals depicting the fallen creator who suffered from the sin in place of humanity, the exceptionally alluring mushrooms, the statue at the altar that had strangely opened its eyes, and the young, yellow-haired Jack who had been hiding in the back. All these scenes took shape and were reflected in the eyes of the Tarot Club members in the most direct and realistic manner. The gloomy and dark tone, the sense of crisis with every step that was taken, and the bizarre development that the son was experiencing made Audrey rather excited. She became extremely interested in what he was saying. This is the situation around the city of Silver. It's more attractive than any novel I've ever read. This is the charm of mystery, uncertainty, and terror combined. Of course, to the humans who live there, this isn't a good thing. Audrey's thoughts were in disarray. She wanted nothing more than to immediately become a powerhouse at the level of a demigod and venture into that region ruled by darkness and storms. Klein watched and sighed emotionally. He was sighing because it truly wasn't easy for the city of Silver to last all this time in such an environment. He sighed because little son still wasn't smart enough and had no experience. Otherwise, he would have been able to completely present the events that happened in the form of a movie or documentary. It would certainly be exciting and attractive. However, this way, the description would take too long. My spirituality wouldn't be able to endure if everyone were to watch such a movie. Also, the longer one stays above the grey fog, the more likely it is that something bad will happen in the outside world. Klein suddenly felt lucky. Alger finished watching in silence as he thought over it. He got the son to pick a few important points. He had chosen to present them above the long bronze table. Among them included the mural of the fallen creator resisting the 6 evil gods. Which evil gods are these? Alger looked at the octopus with lightning wrapped around its body, black waves at its feet, an avian feathered cloak on its back, and a 3-pronged trident in its hand as he began to make connections. Derek shook his head honestly. I don't know. I thought you would know them. Audrey and Force cast their gazes over at the same time, carefully observing them several times, but they still failed to come up with any guesses. They had originally thought that these were 6 of the 8 ancient gods from the legends of the City of Silver, but they couldn't find a suitable match. After all, there was a dragon, an elf, a giant, a phoenix, and an annihilation demonic wolf, while there was only one giant in the mural. The fool took a serious look and his pupils nearly contracted. In consideration of his standing, he had only taken a cursory look at the mural in the beginning, but now he finally realized that something was wrong. This is very similar to the statues of the 6 gods which I saw in the Tudor family's underground ruin, except that one is a normal version and the other is a corrupted version. It really is a bit hard for people to look at it directly, especially Earth Mother, Lord of Storms, and Eternal Blazing Sunday. Not only have they been sullied as evil gods, but they're even akin to ugly monsters. Klein didn't feel a sense of sudden enlightenment from having realized the truth. He had expected the true creator to disparage the 6 gods and distort their images. However, I can't completely ignore the possibility of this mural appearing. Just like how I had always thought that the Orthodox gods didn't have a human form, with only symbols left. As a result, the statues in the ruins of the Tudor family have made me less certain. It seems like the establishment of the images of the gods have undergone a long evolution, and many secrets are hidden within. Klein was relieved when he saw that Miss Justice was focusing on examining the mural and didn't pay attention to Mr. Fool's attitude. Because it involved whether or not little son could get out of the strange predicament of repeating that short period of life, he decided to tell them what he knew. Of course, the long introduction and display of the images of the 6 gods inside the underground ruin didn't fit the identity of the fool. He intended to control the world to complete this task. And this was in line with his goal of making the world and Sherlock Moriarty equivalent. The fool should enigmatically say, Evernight, Sun, Storm, Wisdom, Earth, Giant, and then give no explanation, with superfluous descriptions. Klein thought for 2 seconds and let the world say in a hoarse voice, I've seen similar statues. After attracting everyone's gaze, he paused and added, in an adventure to a 4th epoch ruin. Audrey was very interested, but she maintained her basic level of restraint. Mr. World, what kind of statues were there? Can you show it to us? Of course, if you aren't willing to, or if you require compensation, it's negotiable. There's no need, as this might also solve some of my doubts. The World smiled darkly. He acted by making a request to Mr. Fool, and when he got permission, he conjured the statues of the 6 gods and their corresponding sacred emblems. With her head against the full moon, the lady, who wore layers upon layers of hazy dresses that didn't repeat, gave off an exceptionally beautiful feeling. On her long black skirt, there were also specks of starlight, as if it were a night sky, and on top of that iconic Evernight sacred emblem. Audrey immediately recognized her to be the Evernight goddess she worshipped. This statue was most similar to the evil god in the upper left corner of the mural, but its face was more human, and there were no strange eyes hidden around it. What sacrilege! This is sacrilegious to the goddess. Audrey was a little angry, but she quickly calmed down. As the most infamous evil god, it's expected that the true creator would let his followers disfigure the goddess. But why would there be a humanoid sculpture of the goddess in the underground ruins? Isn't it said that the orthodox gods only have symbols? Audrey frowned slightly, lost in thought. Alger felt somewhat enlightened as he said with a sigh, so the murals depict the distorted images of the 6 gods. They really had humanoid images in the past. Perhaps this is the reason why the churches have always been trying to find the forsaken land of the gods. As for the forsaken land of the gods, it's most likely hidden in the depths of the Sonia Sea. Yes, it definitely doesn't exist in a normal state, otherwise, it would be impossible for the deities to not notice it. Alger added silently inwardly. The son was first taken aback before he came to a realization. Mr. Hanged Man, are these the deities that all of you mentioned before the Evernight goddess, the Lord of Storms? Yes, the Hanged Man gave an affirmative answer. What do they have to do with the apocalypse? What does it have to do with our land being forsaken by the Lord? Derek subconsciously pressed. Unfortunately, no one could answer him. Force raised her hand in confusion. Why is there no god of steam and machinery? This was the god she believed in. In the northern and southern continents, the 7 gods had always been equal. Rumor has it that the god of steam and machinery, also known as the god of craftsmanship, wasn't born until the 4th epoch. From the looks of it, it's true, and the time node at which Tia was born seems to be in the late 4th epoch, not in the early or mid-4th epoch. The Hanged Man said, a mixture of explanations and guesses. He had an unconcealable enthusiasm for such topics. So that's the case. Force felt a little guilty as she had never read the Steam and Machinery Bible seriously, and her faith appeared as just a way of life. Derek didn't harp on the previous matter and instead asked, is this mural the key point? Perhaps, you can try to break it, but don't let the chief suspect you. The Hanged Man was about to say that he shouldn't attempt to pronounce the honorific names of one of the 6 gods, or else he or they might directly descend into the forsaken land of the gods, but after careful consideration, he realized that the little son didn't know the corresponding honorific names at all. All right. Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man. You're always so kind and enthusiastic. Also, Miss Justice, Miss Magician, and Mr. World, you are similarly as kind-hearted. Derek thanked them sincerely. Kind? Enthusiastic? The Hanged Man was momentarily unsure of how to react. This was the first time that someone had used such words to describe him. After the discussion was over, Klein suddenly remembered something. In the previous exploration of the abandoned temple of the true creator, the city of Silver found the name Rose Redemption. However, it didn't seem to pay attention to this. It can't be ignored. According to the evil spirit in the underground ruin, this extremely secretive organization is an organization led by fallen angels, and it is in no way inferior to the Twilight Hermit Order. Perhaps the cyclic time was set up by them. Thinking of this, the fool, who was sitting upright in a high-backed chair, leisurely adjusted his posture and used his fingers to lightly tap the edge of the long, mottled table. Audrey immediately turned her head and looked at Mr. Fool in excitement, waiting for him to give a hint. The Hanged Man, the Sun, the Magician, and the world also looked expectantly at Mr. Fool. Amid the fog, Klein chuckled and said, "Rose Redemption." Rose Redemption? What is that? The key point to getting out of this predicament? That's right, there's such a name in the corner of a mural near the top of the temple. Derek seemed to understand something. Alger, Audrey, and Force also recalled and gave the name Rose Redemption high importance, but they didn't fully understand the true meaning that Mr. Fool was trying to convey. Honorable Mr. Fool, what does Rose Redemption represent? Audrey raised her hand and took the initiative to ask. This time, Klein didn't respond other than giving a short laugh. His idea was very simple. The organization, the Rose Redemption, was intricately tied to the true creator. No matter what happened in the temple, it would always point to them in some way. As for whether this name was a so-called key point, Klein wasn't sure or worried. After all, he held the right to interpretation. If the Sun and the others misunderstood the real meaning, how could it be Mr. Fool's fault? Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 62. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Seeing the fool chuckling silently, Audrey and the others had no choice but to withdraw their gaze and stop asking questions. In a situation like this where they were only given hints and not explanations, they didn't find it problematic. Existences at the level of deities typically had similar habits, and sometimes, what they gave weren't even hints, but revelations. In the eyes of a powerful figure like Mr. Fool, just providing a single name is enough. Our failure to comprehend things is because we are lacking. We need to work harder at figuring out and attempting things. Audrey was increasingly looking forward to her future as a psychiatrist. I remember that there was something related to Rose Redemption in that semi-abandoned temple. Alger tilted his head and looked at the sun. Without any hesitation, Derek nodded and said, "Yes." It was text derived from Jotun in a corner of the murals. We used quite some time to decipher those words. Text derived from Jotun. Alger hadn't paid much attention to this detail before, but he couldn't help but make connections at that moment in time. That little boy, Jack, seems to have gone there from the Sonya Sea. Text derived from Jotun. Alger deliberated before making a request to conjure a line of text. Those words were in ancient Fey Sag, the origins of the northern continent's language, and they meant Rose Redemption. Derek took a closer look and was stunned. It's very close, but the way that the words end is handled differently. Mr. Hanged Man, is this a language from where you come from? As he spoke, Derek conjured the text on the mural again. Yes. Alger gave an affirmative answer. This language itself has evolved. The one you found should be of an earlier type. In the world of linguistics, this type of language, which is similar to ancient Feysak, is widely regarded as a characteristic of the Solomon Empire. Historian Klein gave the most accurate answer in his mind. Alger paused. What about the content of the corresponding mural? I wasn't in charge of that area, and I didn't take a careful look before departing. Derek instantly felt ashamed. Alger nodded without a change in expression. Find a chance to clarify this. There might be a crucial point hidden within. All right. Derek was increasingly convinced that things weren't so bad after all. Seeing that he had relaxed quite a bit, Audrey was a little curious and a little puzzled as she asked, "Mr. Hanged Man, if that young boy named Jack is the child of the listener you described, why would he be able to communicate with the sun and the others?" After discussing the corresponding terms for Rose Redemption, she was completely certain that the City of Silver used a different language compared to the other countries in the northern and southern continent like Lun. And above the grey fog, everyone is able to communicate fluently, without any gaps in communication. It's all thanks to Mr. Fool's powers. Audrey praised in her heart. Alger scoffed as he looked at her. Miss Justice, you haven't experienced any Beyonder events, have you? Jack has already become such a terrifying monster, so what else can't he change? Trust me, there are times when language knowledge is very easy to obtain, with it taking just a second or two. Audrey blinked, feeling that she had once again exposed that she didn't have much experience or knowledge in mysticism. After this matter came to a close, the tarot gathering resumed as per the usual schedule. Audrey looked towards the end of the long bronze table and said, Mr. Fool, this time there are 3 more Roselle diary pages. I still owe you 7. Upon hearing that, Force hurriedly added, Mr. Fool, I also received some responses. There will be new Roselle diary pages the next time. Very well. Klein chuckled in response. By the side, Derek suddenly felt ashamed again, because he hadn't had time to visit the library last week to look through any material and memorize historical details due to his participation in the exploratory team. After a simple process, Klein picked up the 3 diary pages which were conjured, and he began to read with great anticipation. The 8th of August. For the first time, I was invited to the White Maple Palace to attend a ball held by His Majesty. These aristocrats are really f***ing extravagant, with the food they eat completely being in pursuit of novelty. Things like grilled swans, sheep's testicles. I have to say, I was very surprised at the beginning. The aristocrats of this world, yes, this is limited only to aristocrats, really love cleanliness. It's common for them to take baths, and toilet paper has already taken a nascent form. They totally aren't like the aristocrats of Earth's Middle Ages. I originally thought that this was an effect of the existence of true gods, but I was later informed that this was an improvement that had to be made because of some kind of threat. Beyonders of a particular sequence are able to spread the plague through dirty habits. I wonder which pathway and sequence that is. At that time, my first thought was that there's something wrong with these aristocrats' brains, right? Since they're afraid of the plague, why don't they clean up the streets? Why didn't they build a complete sewage system? Why don't they uplift the slums? They're all in the same city. Does this mean that this place will be fine when there's a plague over there? Well, with water sources, food, and people isolated and them moving only in one direction, perhaps it really will be all right. But there are plagues that can be transmitted through the air. When I hold a high position, I must push for urban planning and clean up the environment. Even without the plague, just living in such a stinking city is still very annoying. Oh right, I've been summoned tonight by His Majesty. I thought that since I was born on Earth, I, who received an education of all men being equal, would be neither humble nor arrogant and appear rather calm. But in fact, I remained very nervous and excited, unconsciously bending my waist and bowing my head. Of course, I know that in terms of dignity, I'm equal to the king. This is the charm of power. Even though this entire page is filled with daily activities, the emperor has still managed to make me laugh. He was also someone with a goal. Indeed, even for someone born in the modern world, they will still become apprehensive and sycophantic when faced with someone of high status, a person who can influence their fates. Klein smiled, his mood much more relaxed. He turned to the second page and continued reading. The 11th of November. About to advance to sequence 4 to become a demigod. After this, as long as I don't lose control, then my life's natural order will experience a qualitative change. I would no longer be a short-lived creature. Of course, different sequences of different pathways will be in different states. I face 2 choices. One is alchemist of the savant pathway, and the other is mysticologist of the mystery prior pathway. Eventually, I chose not to change pathways since the hidden sage is a very dangerous existence. However, I ultimately suspect that he isn't a real deity. Perhaps, he is of a slightly lower level. After becoming an alchemist, I will be able to inject soul into the items I create and give them life. This is the feeling of being a creator. It will definitely be excellent. It's also the reason why I continued choosing this Beyonder pathway. After obtaining this sequences beyond a characteristic, I should be able to complete more of my concepts. There will come a day when the saying, "It's not that we aren't working hard, it's just that the cheat has a Gundam." It will be a Gundam in the truest meaning of the word. Your favorite stories on n/o/lve/elbin.com. The only problem is that the corresponding ritual of alchemist needs to extract all the life force of a particular region, desertification of the land and the drying of lakes. Why is this not much different from a cult sacrificial ritual? I've always felt that the potion sequence system has too many dark and crazy parts to it. Occasionally, it would be so evil that it can make one despair. The Emperor also feels the same way. Seeing this, Klein couldn't help but sigh. Sometimes, he also felt that the background color of this world was grayish-black and crazy. Things like the law of beyond a characteristics conservation and indestructibility, the laws of pathway convergence, and interchangeability of close sequences all bring about change that leads to tragedy. Alchemist is a very interesting sequence. Alchemical life sounds forbidden and is a domain very close to that of deities. I wonder if the Emperor made any Gundams before he was assassinated. Probably not. Klein's thoughts drifted away for a moment. He was rather curious about the ritual of becoming a demigod-like high sequence beyonder. Unfortunately, Roselle didn't record much of it. After all, it was a diary, not a notebook. Sequence for mysticologist of the mystery prior pathway sounds good too. Klein turned over the second diary page and displayed the third page in front of him. The 23rd of April. This bunch of aristocrats really are a mess. I even thought that Karen had seduced me for sex because she had taken a fancy for my inner self. But who knew that her husband, the Earl of Champagne, was peeping in the opposite room? He was even thrilled and even King wanted to FK me. You're reading on .com, thanks. I'm sorry, but I just can't accept it, so I had to kick him out of the room. Compared to their family, I'm just a pure child. Klein was momentarily speechless. He felt that the private life of Emperor Roselle was really filled with excitement and that many of the Inti's aristocracy were also sufficiently eccentric. If some aristocrat tries to seek novelty and finds a curly-haired baboon, some kind of disease might even be born. Klein sighed and looked down. The 25th of April. To cultivate my character and hone my mind, I went fishing at Swan Lake. I hope that one day I can go fishing at sea for a mermaid. Sigh, I've been quite depraved recently. I have to invigorate my spirit and invent more things. I can't leave any gaps. Since I transmigrated to this world, I will brand this era with my name. Emperor, it's better if you had fallen into depravity. Klein's mouth twitched without any intention of making comment. Then, he calmly looked at the last diary entry on the last page. The 26th of April. Zaratul came visiting. I deliberately asked him what a miracle was. He asked me in return about what I thought it was. What I think it is. There is only one miracle in my heart, and that is the wonders of civilization. For example, the great Twilight Hall of the Faysak Empire, the former residence of the Giant King, Ormir. Zaratul finally gave a direct answer. He said, "What is a miracle? A miracle is to be resurrected from the dead." Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 63. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. A miracle is to be resurrected from the dead? Klein suddenly remembered what had happened to him. The head injury of a man who shot himself in the head miraculously healing, a beyonder who, having died from having his heart crushed, crawled out of his grave in the middle of the night. Are these considered miracles of being resurrected from the dead? Is this the miracle the leader of the secret order, Zaratul, spoke of? And sequence 2 of the seer pathway is called a miracle invoker. At this moment, Klein felt like he had grasped something important, but he was unable to piece together all the clues to form the truth he wanted. As I had guessed before, there are other factors at work for my choice of having seer as my beginning sequence. My greatest support is the mysterious space above the grey fog, which happens to eliminate all interference and provide seers the most coveted environment. My characteristic of resurrection also seems to have come from the grey fog as well. When I came to Backland, the events in which Nimblewright Master Rozigo was involved in were naturally drawn to me, which is consistent with the convergence of beyonder characteristics of the same pathway. The higher quality it is, the stronger the attraction as the effects appear intermittently. The sudden change in the Antigonus family notebook style of passing key information to me, related to the main peak of the Hornaces mountain range via the misfortune cloth puppet, might also be a result of such elements. Combined with the other miscellaneous phenomena, does it mean that this mysterious space has a very close relationship with the seer beyonder pathway? That this is a grade 0 sealed artifact of the corresponding sequence? Or perhaps it's a divine kingdom left behind by a sequence 0 of the same pathway? There's also the possibility of it being the so-called uniqueness of the seer pathway. Klein moved his gaze away from Rozelle's diary, his anticipation for advancing to a high sequence beyonder increasing. He wondered what he would discover in the hidden area after he completed the staircase of light. Perhaps the reason for my transmigration and the way home will be found there. He suppressed his excitement and allowed Rozelle's diary pages to disappear from his hands. At the same time, he became increasingly wary of the leader of the secret order, Zaratul. He was a powerful existence that had long since become a miracle invoker from the seer pathway many years ago. There might be times and matters that have his fingerprints hidden all over them. Although all of these thoughts were churning in his mind, Klein acted as though nothing had happened as he calmly said, "You can begin your transactions." Force immediately turned to look at Miss Justice, who sat on the same side of the table, and she said with expectation, "I have received a reply. My teacher has a pair of mirror dragon eyes. The price is £1,000. Knee updates at novel-bin.com. Upon saying that, Force felt a little uneasy. This was because Dorian Gray Abraham's reserve price was £800, which was already at a premium above the usual £500 to £600. And on that foundation, she had added another £200. After attending so many tarot gatherings and all kinds of beyonder circles, I finally understand one thing. Just like Emperor Rozelle said, money isn't omnipotent, but nothing can be done without money. Although I've already received the fixed payment for my new book and have savings reaching £350, there's still the Spirit Eater stomach pouch awaiting me. There's also all kinds of expenses needed for sequence 7, 6, 5, and even 4. The meaning before Mr. Fool's secret hint is that I should be able to be freed from the curse of the full moon once I become a high sequence beyonder. Even if I can find some of them through Teacher, I can't fully rely on him and the Abraham family. In this regard, saving up money on my own isn't enough, and efforts must be made to make money. The price of £1,000 is really expensive. If Miss Justice wishes to bargain, I'll later tell her that Teacher agreed to lower the price by £100 after repeated negotiations. As Force waited for the reply, she consoled herself. £1,000? Audrey never expected to receive news for the psychiatrist potion ingredient so quickly, so she subconsciously asked in a confirming tone. Without waiting for a reply from Force, she happily added, "Okay, deal." Although she still owed Viscount Glane a final installment and still owed the Fool's Adorer £2,000, she would officially be declared an adult at the New Year's ball. Not only would her control over her wealth be greater than ever before, but she would also receive many valuable gifts, such as the one promised by her father, Earl Hall, a few days earlier. He had promised to give his dear daughter a further £50,000 in Backland Bank shares and more than £2,000 in cash. Hence, £1,000 wasn't a number that she was bothered with. Audrey had originally asked Mr. Fool to extend the payment period of the £2,000 to February or March in order, on the one hand, to pay off her debt to Viscount Glane, and to save up money as discreetly as possible without arousing suspicion. On the other hand, she had to set aside an additional budget for the ingredient of the psychiatrist potion. Now was the time to use the budget. At most, I'll have to tighten my belt like how I did for the past few months. After March, there wouldn't be any problems. Audrey thought, not troubled at all. She agreed? She agreed. Force was both happy and confused. Force asked Mr. Fool to bear witness to the transaction and arranged for Miss Justice to make the payment first before she delivered the Beyonder ingredient on Wednesday. As Force decided to head for Pritz Harbor immediately upon receiving the cash, without wasting any time in the middle, she looked at the three gentlemen, the Sun, the Hanged Man, and the World. "Does anyone have any information on the Spirit-Eater stomach pouch?" After calming down, she discovered that with her experience in the acting method, she could digest the excess beyond a characteristic much faster than she had expected. 1 week was almost equivalent to 2 weeks of the past. In about 10 days, she would be able to completely digest and resolve the problem. When she gathers the ingredients and advances to Trickmaster, she felt that she would be able to perfectly pass the first test given by her teacher, Dorian. She would gain more attention and would no longer be a mere student who was taken in out of gratitude. Derek nodded and said, "I was just about to tell you that during this exploration, we obtained some Spirit-Eater stomach pouches. I can exchange it at low prices after I return to the City of Silver." "Ah, that's under the premise that I'm no longer under surveillance." "Okay, but it seems that you have no use for gold pounds?" Force asked directly. After the operation to save Little Sun, she had a preliminary understanding of the City of Silver. Without waiting for the Sun to say a word, Alger interjected, "You can hand me the corresponding cash or gold coins to me. £300 is a very reasonable price. I will provide the Solar High Priest potion formula to the Sun." "Mr. Hanged Man, you have the formula to Solar High Priest?" Derek asked in pleasant surprise. During his previous patrols and his recent explorations, he had increasingly felt that the powers of the Sun pathway were perfect for dealing with the dark. Although the giant pathway sequence 6 Dawn Paladin could already create the Light of Dawn, in the realm of the Holy and Light, it's still inferior to a light suppliant. The Hanged Man nodded slightly and said, "That's right." He had found the Solar High Priest potion formula in a treasury of the Rorsted Archipelago, but it was only recently that he had found an opportunity to provide sufficient justification and have the sufficient conditions to have the right to read it once. The reason that he gave was that people suspected to be priests of the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun had appeared on the Sonya Sea, and since he was temporarily unable to return to the Intis Republic, he could only search for the potion ingredients corresponding to Solar High Priest. Moreover, the hatred for the Eternal Blazing Sun could turn mere rumors into the basis for action by the Church of the Lord of Storms. Derek was delighted at first, but he soon said with some awkwardness, "The value of the Sequence 7 potion formula is higher than a Spirit-Eater's stomach pouch. I don't have the gold pounds all of you were talking about." "You can repay it with ingredients of the same value," the Hanged Man gave a terse response. "But I don't know what I can get from you. First, you should make a list of the common monsters found around the City of Silver and their corresponding ingredients. I'll then choose from that list." "No problem. After this exploration is over, I will do it as quickly as possible." Derek was visibly relieved. By the side, Klein wanted to facepalm, but in the end, he didn't manipulate the world to break the deal. It was because he also wanted to know what kind of monsters and ingredients were common around the City of Silver. As Audrey secretly sighed, the Hanged Man looked around and raised his request. "I need a pair of dragon-eyed sea condor eyes. I'll pay the necessary compensation." He only mentioned the dragon-eyed sea condor eyes. In other words, Mr. Hanged Man has clues regarding the blue shadow falcon's crystalline feathers. He really does have many channels and resources. Audrey, who had seen the potion formula for Windblessed, thought with some enlightenment. After the transactions came to an end, they began to freely exchange information about their areas, and the end of the tarot gathering quickly approached. During the process, the World inquired for clues about mermaids and obtained an answer similar to the one he had received from Sharon. When everything was over, Klein, who had been watching quietly, thought it necessary to warn Miss Justice and Miss Magician. A terrifying object that is suspected to be a Grade 0 sealed artifact has appeared around Prince Edisac. It might even involve 0-08, which would definitely not be a simple matter. Furthermore, the last time a similar situation occurred, Tingen City had faced the threat of an evil god spawn, and it had almost disappeared from the map. Hence, now there's also a hidden danger in Backland. Klein thought for a few seconds, making the world say in a hoarse voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have recently received some information that a major event is brewing in Backland." This will bring about a great deal of unrest and may lead to a tragedy. What's the major event? Audrey asked with concern. Unknowingly, her brow had begun to slightly furrow. I don't know. The world shook his head calmly. Where would the element of unrest and the possible tragedy come from? Force asked nervously. From the previous gatherings, she had confirmed that Mr. World's sources were trustworthy. The World acted stumped as he shook his head and said, "There's contradictory information, making it impossible for me to give a definite answer." Upon saying this, he looked up and earnestly cast his gaze towards the figure within the grey fog at the end of the mottled table. "Honourable Mr. Fool, your adorer in Backland must have detected something, right?" Everyone's eyes immediately focused towards the end of the long bronze table, with everyone feeling different feelings: curiosity, worry, anticipation, and tenseness. With the attention on him, Klein leaned back and said in a casual tone, "Edisac Augustus." Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 64. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Prince Edisac Augustus? What connection does he have with the danger that might lead to tragedy? Moreover, this matter seems to have received the attention of Mr. Fool. Audrey instantly matched the name with a face, giving rise to great worry and doubt in her. In her opinion, things that caught the attention of Mr. Fool were either very dangerous, extremely secretive, or had far-reaching importance, and were by no means simple. For example, the true creator had attempted to descend upon Backland with the help of Lenivus and the harsh conditions of East Borough's factory district, Emperor Razel's Dark Emperor card, or the death of the Duke Negan, and the Twilight Hermit Order. Taking these examples into account, Audrey had good reason to believe that, if not handled well, or given too little attention, the major event involving Prince Edisac would inevitably lead to a very, very terrible storm. Yes. Prince Edisac hasn't bothered me for quite some time, and I was only relieved by that and didn't think too much about it. Now, it does seem a little problematic. At the previous ball, he still warmly kept me back to discuss some boring topics, trying his hand at pompous bad humor. But just 2 or 3 days after that, he turned rather cold and had even deliberately avoided me. I have to find a chance to ask Father about him, but I can't show too much curiosity, or else it might be very possible that he would agree to the royal family's marriage request. Audrey recalled some details, and she suddenly felt her shoulders sink from the weight. She had never liked Prince Edisac, including his 2 elder brothers, and she had no intention of becoming a princess consort. As for the reason, it was very simple. The followers of the Evernight goddess couldn't accept that the Augustus family had believed in the Lord of Storms for generations, which meant their arrogance, pomposity, contempt, and eccentricity against women had penetrated deep into their bones. It was hard to change them, which was the one thing Audrey couldn't tolerate the most. When she thought of the strict, ancient, and extremely conservative environment she would find herself in after becoming a princess consort, Audrey felt that she would surely go crazy and flee, disregarding everything else. So, she wasn't moved at all by the rather solicitous flattery of the princes, she was even very repulsed. Edisac Augustus? The last name implies that he's a member of the royal family. I vaguely remember that he's a prince? What dangerous matter is he going to do? I have no way of coming into contact with him. Right, I can ask Miss Audrey and Viscount Glaint for help, but I have to think of a reason ahead of time to prevent any suspicion from them. Force frowned slightly as she interpreted Mr. Fool's words. Alger was very interested in the matter, but he didn't dare to ask Mr. Fool, who was obviously just providing a hint. He could only ponder to himself for 2 seconds before saying to Justice, the magician, and the world, "The atmosphere over the sea isn't calm either. It might have a connection with Backland, just like those machines." His words were completely baseless. He simply wanted to exaggerate the degree of the danger and let the 3 Tarot Club members in Backland investigate it diligently. I have to say that Mr. Hangman has acted in concert so well. Klein, who was watching from the sidelines, gave up on the idea of having the world say something similar. He only mentioned Prince Edisac, but not the lady with the sapphire ring who was suspected of having a Grade 0 sealed artifact. he didn't even mention the possibility that the matter Prince Edisak might be involved in had to do with 0-08 and Inst Zangwill, because he didn't know the circumstances of the top-sealed artifact that could even destroy a country. All he could rely on were minute clues to make guesses that he wasn't completely sure of. He was afraid that if he directly told the key points to Justice and Miss Magician, their investigations would be detected by the target the moment they honed in on the target. This was also why Klein didn't try to find an opportunity to inform the machinery hive mind. Based on his guesses about sealed artifact 0-08, he suspected that if he left Mince Street and rode a horse carriage to the Lever Cathedral or the Steam Cathedral, he would encounter an unexpected and absolutely unstoppable attack, such as the eruption of a sealed artifact hidden underground or a fatal strike of a high-sequence beyonder. Only the screening of the grey fog allowed Klein to not worry about such problems. To a certain extent, he could inform Justice and the Magician about this through a more gentle, more roundabout, and more veiled manner. In addition, Klein had other plans. It was to leave Backlund by bowing out the stage as a side character among side characters and changing his appearance without anyone noticing. He would then secretly return and contact the machinery hive mind in a manner beyond the Grade 0 sealed artifact senses. Get your favorite novels at no/v/e/elbinin.com. Let's hope this will succeed. I hope there's a chance of finding Inst Zangwill. Yes, the premise is that he is indeed involved in this matter. Wait a minute, while Mr. Azik was after Inst Zangwill, he had a conflict with MI9. He became secretly wanted, and MI9 has always been considered to be a pro-royal faction in the military. A series of coincidences revolving Prince Edisak is rather similar to the features displayed by sealed artifact 0-08 in the past. This seems to indirectly confirm Inst Zangwill's existence. Klein closed his eyes, and the bright boots and pale hand flashed back to him. He leaned back in his chair, his lips curving upward. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall meet next week. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall. Audrey stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring blankly at her reflection. There were good news and bad news for her at this tarot gathering. The good news was that she was about to receive one of the psychiatrist potion's main ingredients. Although she was no longer the ignorant girl who had bought some basic general knowledge from the hanged man for £1,000 and knew the approximate price of a lot of beyonder ingredients, she didn't mind paying a premium for the eyes of a mirror dragon. After Duke Negan's assassination, she gained the desire and motivation to raise her sequence to receive a corresponding combat strength. For this, she didn't want to wait any longer and was willing to pay a price as long as the ingredients appeared. She would immediately accept the offer as long as the price wasn't too outrageous, in case something unexpected happened. It's like a precious piece of jewelry that many noble ladies have set their eyes on. It's also like the purebred houses with unique bloodlines that men like. The corresponding premium is inevitable and unavoidable. At times, it's not impossible to have the price double or triple. Besides, with Force busying herself in the process of contacting her teacher, she definitely shouldn't be left wasting her time while taking on risks. Yes. She also doesn't know that I'm Justice. Audrey thought indifferently. As for the bad news, it was no doubt related to the matter of Prince Edisak. It left her concerned and worried. Fortunately, Mr. World received the news, and Mr. Fool had provided a warning. Otherwise, who knows how things would have turned out. Audrey, with such excellent conditions, you could certainly solve this problem. Come on. The girl drew the sign of the crimson moon against the reflection in the mirror and tried hard to be optimistic. Then, she restrained her emotions and headed out to the piano room, preparing to participate in her scheduled piano lesson as if nothing had happened. This was because Earl Hall and his wife, as well as Hibbert Hall, wouldn't be home until dinner, and she had no one to ask for information now. She could only tell herself to be calm, to be composed, and to be patient. Before the tutor arrived, Audrey casually played the piano, using the beautiful melody to cleanse her mind and soul. When she finished playing, she noticed that Susie had opened the door at some point and was sitting beside her. She still had a pair of gold-rimmed glasses hanging around her neck. Audrey, what problems did you encounter? The sound of your piano tells me that you are frustrated over something, Susie said suddenly. Ah? Audrey froze, not knowing how to reply. She suddenly felt that having a mind-reading dog at home wasn't necessarily a good thing. Within the campsite that had a lit bonfire, with his eyes closed, Derek Berg thought back quietly to what had happened at the tarot gathering and made sure that he hadn't forgotten the memories of his repeated experiences. After an unknown period of time, he opened his eyes, which were brimming with anticipation, and looked around. However, what entered into his eyes were Flames and his teammates, who were exactly the same as in his memories. At that moment, the cross-legged demon hunter Colin, who was leaning against a stone pillar, said, "We will set off after 50 rounds of lightning." At this moment, Derek was sure that everything that had happened before wasn't a dream or a hallucination. Sherwood Borough. 15, Minsk Street. Klein went down to the first floor and sat in the activity room, feeling the warmth of the fireplace. He quietly rocked in the reclining chair without reading the newspapers, magazines, or even books. It was all so peaceful and silent until he heard the ringing of his doorbell. Klein, who was wearing a house shirt and cashmere vest, got up and walked towards the door. The visitor took him by surprise. He opened the door and chuckled. "Good afternoon, Emlyn. Aren't you supposed to be helping at the Harvest Church at this hour?" It was the handsome, somewhat effeminate, vampire Emlyn White, whose hair was combed back at an angle. The arrogant man's expression froze when he heard Klein's greeting. It took him a bit of effort to recover his composure. "I have something to consult with you, Detective Sherlock Moriarty." Emlyn enunciated one word at a time. After inviting him into the activity room, Klein returned to his reclining chair and asked with a smile, "What is it?" "The fee for a consultation is £1, but the consultation cannot exceed an hour." Emlyn White didn't pay attention to his words, and he said while deep in thought, "A big shot wants me to do something. Although that matter can help me solve my problem indirectly, it also contains a great amount of risk. I don't have any friends, and I'm afraid my parents will be worried, and you're a very knowledgeable beyond a detective. What do you suggest? Reject or accept? Solve your problem? Clearing the psychological cue?" Klein said thoughtfully, "I can't give you any advice with just the word or something." Emlyn White fell silent for a few seconds before he clenched his teeth and said in a low voice, "It has something to do with that fool." "Who?" Klein almost lifted his hand to his ear. Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 65. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. After a second of confirmation, Klein clasped his hands together and leaned forward. "What exactly is this something?" Get the latest chapters on no/velbin.com. "No, I can't say any further." Emlyn White shook his head firmly. Afraid of being probed, Klein didn't pursue the matter. He simply analyzed the situation based on the information that the vampire had just revealed. Something to do with the fool. It can help Emlyn White resolve his problem. Contains a high risk. Combined with his previous ideas, this seems to indicate that he intended to hold an appropriate ritual to pray to the fool, which is also me, so as to eliminate the psychological cue and gain his long-awaited freedom. However, this is no longer a ritual that Emlyn will be holding himself. It's a result of a particular big shot's instructions, and with this vampire's pride, for him to address the person that way, it most likely means that the person is a powerhouse among the sanguine. Why would a sanguine big shot send a descendant to pray to the fool? Had they started working with the Aurora Order? Confused, Klein looked up at the expectant Emlyn and scoffed to himself. "Try guessing if I'll respond to your prayers." He hesitated for 2 seconds and didn't make a suggestion. Instead, he said, "Statistically speaking, when praying to a hidden existence without understanding the situation, 30 out of 100 cases would not receive any response. 68 cases will end up encountering all sorts of terrible things and cause them to lose their lives, or live a life worse than death. Only 2 cases have the possibility of success, allowing them to get what they want, but the price they pay might not be what they want." As a former keyboard warrior, Klein had always believed that when it came to proving something or reinforcing a point of view, anyone who just gave an example, an exception, without mentioning the entire sample and overall statistics was being an asshole. It was merely a trick of concept, and in these cases, there were usually similar companion words, such as I have a friend, a girl I know, or someone around me. Therefore, to convince Emlyn White, he deliberately fabricated some data. Of course, this wasn't entirely baseless. At least, many of the files which Klein had read while he was a member of a Nighthawks team had described similar situations. Only 2 cases of success? Problems happened to 68 cases? Startled, Emlyn couldn't help but lift his hand to smooth his hair. Basically, that is the level of danger over the matter you're going to do. If you have malicious intentions, the risk is even higher than this, Klein replied sincerely. Emlyn shook his head subconsciously. No, there's no malice. Besides, the big shot will protect me in the process. No malice? Even if you have malice, you might not know since you're just cannon fodder who has been pushed to the front lines. Klein raised his right palm and strengthened his tone with a gesture. This will reduce the risk by a lot, but it definitely won't reduce it to 0. Does that big shot really have the means to resist a hidden existence? Probably not, Emlyn answered haltingly. So? Klein spread his hands. He suddenly revealed a smile and said, Emlyn, there is no need for you to take this risk. Even if you completely believe in Earth Mother, it will not affect your life in any way. Look at the citizens of Fainapotter, don't they eat, dress, and do whatever they want? When the time comes, there's a high chance that Father Utravsky will no longer force you to do volunteer work at the Harvest Church. You will regain your original freedom. Furthermore, I believe that you have adapted well to the teachings of Earth Mother without any contradictions. Emlyn White remained silent for a while and said, being a believer because I like her beliefs is completely different from being forcefully turned into a believer through a psychological cue. Even if I do abandon the moon one day and believe in Earth Mother, I also hope that it is a choice that I freely made. It has nothing to do with others, this is the last pride of a sanguine. Klein looked at Emlyn with some surprise. He hadn't expected him to be so insistent. He considered for 2 seconds and didn't try to persuade him again by giving a terse acknowledgement. The problem is actually very simple, that is, do you have the courage to face a certain degree of danger because of the orders of the big shot and the temptation to get rid of the queue? If you're willing to sacrifice your life for this, then the answer is extremely simple. In short, this matter will ultimately be left to you to decide. Emlyn listened with a heavy expression, and he instinctively retorted, if I really choose to make the attempt, it's definitely not for myself, but for all sanguine. Resolving this problem is just an additional perk. For all sanguine? What matter of mine involves all sanguine? That big shot was lying to you, right? Klein sneered. Do you believe that a weak vampire has the chance to save an entire race? Sanguine, sanguine. Emlyn emphasized. Moreover, my strength isn't bad either. It's equivalent to sequence 7 of you humans. By the way, it's the kind that specializes in combat. As for whether you believe it or not, you wouldn't understand. He stood up and said, although your analysis and suggestions are meaningless, I still have to thank you. The consultation fee will be deducted from the previous suitcase and tin box. Ooh? Klein wasn't able to react for a moment to what he was talking about. It was only when Emlyn had left that he suddenly realized what he meant. Aren't the vessels in large transactions usually free? That petty and stingy vampire. In the darkness, in which the frequency of lightning had yet to resume, the exploratory team from the city of Silver punctually arrived at the periphery of the abandoned temple. Derek remembered that during their first operation, all the animal hide lanterns had been extinguished here. The entire team fell into pure darkness, and he had also heard the creepy cry for help coming from the depths of the temple. According to the conjectures from Mr. Hangman and Miss Justice, this might be the starting point for our repeated cycles. But why would we wake up in the campsite outside the city and not directly here? Remembering the discussion at the tarot meeting, Derek raised his arm and prayed secretly, as suggested. A pure light suddenly burst out from his body, causing Joshua and the other members of the exploratory team to quickly assume battle positions. What happened? Demon Hunter Colin drew his sword and asked in a deep voice. Derek looked left and right in horror and said, "Your Excellency, I just heard a child crying, 'Save me, save me.'" He wanted to test if this was a key point. "And now?" Colin asked warily. "I don't hear it anymore." Derek listened carefully. Demon Hunter Colin glanced at Joshua and the others from the corner of his eye. "Did any of you hear it?" "No." The exploratory team members shook their heads. After pondering for a few seconds, Colin came to a decision. He took out a dark blue metal bottle from the secret compartment in his belt and smeared the colorless, viscous liquid on his sword. Then, he stabbed upwards with his sword. Suddenly, the sky lit up. Streaks of silver, snake-like beams started to surge upwards, quickly spreading in all directions. The silver-white light instantly enveloped all the members of the exploratory team, as if illuminating the darkest corner of every single one of them. With a sizzling sound, the silver serpents drilled into the void, heading off into the unknown. Everything calmed down very quickly, leaving only the dim light of the animal hide lantern scattered in silence. Colin narrowed his eyes. Whatever he attempted had sensed something unknown. After a full 5 seconds, he raised his hand and pointed forward. "From now on, we can't afford to be careless. We have to be on full alert." Such familiar words. This isn't the key to breaking out of this predicament. Derek calmed his heart and followed the team into the half-deserted temple without any delay. This time, he learned his lesson and didn't look at the face of the fallen creator. In the process of inspecting the ground, he managed to get himself to investigate the area where the mural was by being proactive. He held onto the animal hide lantern and the axe of Hurricane in his hands as he and one of his teammates began to take action as a small team. He finally reached his destination after passing through a series of mottled and crumbling walls. As the light from the animal hide lantern grew closer, the mural on the wall gradually became clearer. Derek first looked towards the corner and found the strange, memorable line of words. "Rose Redemption." He silently chanted the name, raised the animal hide lantern, and carefully examined the details of the mural. On the highest area of the mottled wall was a huge, blurry, pitch-black cross. A shadow that was difficult to discern was hanging upside down on it. Against such a backdrop, there was a desolate plain. In the plains, there was a long line of people. Their destination was a distant mountain, the cross on top of the mountain, and the figure hanging upside down. Within the line, some of the people were kneeling on the ground, praying devoutly. Others had already stood up and were walking forward while facing a raging wind. Their faces were simple sketches, as though it was trying to highlight their tattered clothing. Only the leader at the front was relatively clearer. It was a tall and thin man with long, silver hair reaching his back. This man had soft facial features, his head was lowered, and his eyes were tightly shut. There were layers upon layers of wings of light on his back. Angel. A legendary angel. Derek observed the situation around the leader with excitement. Soon, he discovered a meandering, rippling river beneath the feet of the seemingly angelic man. The river kept twisting and turning, and it led back into itself, becoming the source. A cycle. This creates a cycle. Derek felt that he had caught on to something important. In the cycles of experiences, there was actually a circular river in the mural on the wall. The latter was obviously hinting or revealing something. Derek looked up and saw the silver-haired angel with an uncountable number of wings. There was a touch of indifference in the gentleness of his face, as though he was looking down at a river, looking down at fate. Is this the true meaning behind Mr. Fool's hint? Derek thought for a moment and decided to give it a try. If he succeeded, he planned on blaming all his anomalies on the boy, Jack. If he failed, no one would remember what he had done. Under the stunned gaze of his teammates, Derek raised the axe of Hurricane and viciously slashed at the river in the mural. The lightning that had just flashed by was triggered, and the silver light fell onto the axe. Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 66. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Bam! Derek's axe, wrapped in streaks of silver, struck the river in the mural, causing the wall to cave in and stone chips to fly everywhere. With one strike, the river that had its source connected to its mouth completely disintegrated. Just as he was looking forward to having the cycle broken, resulting in the members of the exploratory team escaping the temple, Demon Hunter Colin's figure phased away and appeared before him, his face grim. "What were you doing?" The tip of the demigod's sword was still pointed downwards, but the grip on his hilt was clearly tighter than before. Thinking back to the collective wisdom of the Tarot Club members, Derek said, half doubtfully and half fearfully, "Your Excellency, a black shadow flashed past here just now." "It's true." It looked like the figure of a child. Without looking away, Colin Iliad asked another team member, "Hyam, did you see it?" The exploratory team member named Hyam subconsciously moved closer to the chief, firmly shook his head, and said, "No, I didn't see anything." Colin's light blue eyes immediately glowed, revealing two complex dark green symbols. He watched Derek in this state for 4 to 5 seconds. Finally, he withdrew his gaze and said in a normal tone, "This is your first exploration mission. Hallucinations due to being nervous is normal. Subsequently, you are to stay by my side. I think you'll be calmer this way." "Yes, Your Excellency," Derek agreed without any hesitation. Having just made an attempt, he confirmed that the mural wasn't critical. The rose redemption that Mr. Fool suggested likely hides a deeper meaning. It's not that simple. Derek walked silently beside Chief Colin with the axe of Hurricane in hand. What happened afterward wasn't much different from the explorations he remembered from his previous explorations. Everyone repeated the events in the past and arrived at the final hall with an altar for the 6th time. There, they found the yellow-haired boy, Jack, curled up in the shadows. Upon hearing save me," and seeing the silhouette of the child, Demon Hunter Colin nodded his head indiscernibly and retracted most of the attention he had placed on Derek Berg. Just as he was deliberating his words, Derek suddenly asked, "How can we save you?" Jack revealed an excited expression. Save me, send me home. Send me home. Where is your home?" Derek asked, curious and frightened. Seeing this, Colin shut his mouth and tightened his grip. Jack raised his hand weakly and said, my home is at Inmat Harbor." Inmat Harbor. Although Mr. Hanged Man never mentioned it, from the word harbor, Jack really doesn't belong to this place of ours. It's very likely that he comes from the outside world, from the Lun Kingdom where Miss Justice and the others are located. Derek was overjoyed, unable to hide his excitement. His reaction didn't arouse any suspicion from Demon Hunter Colin, because this powerful chief of the 6-member council had also never seen the sea. He could only read from the preserved books that this body of water was many times larger than a lake, as well as the term harbor. The words that came out of the strange boy's mouth presented itself like a painting of a new world in front of Colin. This made him, who was desperately searching for the future of the City of Silver, forget about anything else as he blurted out, "How did you and your companions, get here?" Jack showed a reminiscing expression. "My father and I first traveled by boat, then we met up with his companions and continued on the voyage. After a huge storm, the rest of us touched ground and followed the direction of the Lord's gaze and came all the way here." Followed the direction of the Lord's gaze? Demon Hunter Colin and the others looked at the deity statue in unison, trying to determine where he was staring at. Soon, Colin was able to determine some general information. They had proceeded in the direction of where the statue was looking at. That is to say, as soon as we reverse the process, we can find the shore and the place where they landed. The opposite direction of his gaze is the map around the City of Silver, which was gradually being perfected through continuous explorations, appeared in Colin's mind, allowing him to come up with a preliminary sketch of the route of the boy's journey. If there are no other temples in the middle and no corresponding statues, extrapolating it all the way would pass through the ruins of the giant king's court. Colin's pupils suddenly contracted. That was the palace that once housed the ancient god, giant King Ormir. It wasn't too far away from the City of Silver. The descendants of the Kingdom of Silver, who had been ruled by the giants for generations, knew exactly where the ruins were located, but they were still unable to complete their exploration of the area because it was extremely dangerous, even more dangerous than the pure darkness. According to Colin's extrapolations, the unfamiliar boy and his party had passed through the ruins of the giant King's Court before arriving here. How did they do it? Perhaps they didn't take a completely direct path, and they circled around the giant King's Court. Regardless, there's a path that leads to the sea behind the giant King's Court. And on the other end of the sea might be a human kingdom. Is that the hope of the City of Silver? Colin couldn't help resisting the thought. At this moment, Derek acutely noticed that the clothes on the boy's chest and abdomen were dyed dark red, as though some kind of liquid was slowly seeping out. "Are you hurt?" he cautiously asked. Jack lowered his head and replied in an erratic tone, "Something ugly is growing there." As he spoke, he took off his clothes, revealing his bare chest. It was inlaid with 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. It wasn't painted nor was it made of gems. They were real eyes, a real nose, and a real mouth in the purest sense of the word. Furthermore, they didn't seem to belong to one particular face, but that of 3 people. All of a sudden, Derek imagined a scene in which Jack had used the remnants of his companions after eating them their eyes, nose, and mouth to form a strange face on his chest. The face was gentle and indifferent, giving Derek an inexplicable feeling of familiarity. It took only a second or 2 for Derek to figure out the reason for the familiarity. The face was very much like the angel in the mural above them, the silver-haired angel with his feet over the circular river. Sure enough, the reason we keep repeating the exploration is because of him. A thought struck Derek, and he blurted out a single word, as though he was going to blurt the incantation to extricate himself from the predicament. "Rose Redemption!" he solemnly shouted. Jack raised his head and stared at him, his mouth slowly grinning wide before reaching his ears. Find updates on no/velbin.com. I'm so hungry. So hungry. Derek froze as he saw a fierce battle ensue. When he regained consciousness, he found himself sitting by the bonfire in the campsite again. Rose Redemption isn't the incantation. He began to reflect deeply. The 7th exploration soon began. Derek, who had made an attempt, no longer behaved strangely, but he proactively sought to investigate the Rose Redemption mural. As usual, the exploratory team entered the underground hall with the altar and the deity statue. They found the obviously strange little boy, Jack. After a similar conversation, Derek once again saw the human face that had been pieced together with the facial features of other people. Now experienced, he didn't take any actions which could agitate the boy. He lowered his voice and said to Demon Hunter Colin, "Your Excellency, the face on his chest is very similar to the angel in the mural above us. It's the angel with silver hair whose feet are above a river that is connected from mouth to source. Yes, the mural which is labeled Rose Redemption at the corner." Colin was taken aback at first before he frowned. As he paid attention and consoled Jack, he sized up Derek from the corner of his eye. After a few seconds of silence, he said with a suppressed voice, "Due to you mentioning this matter, you made me think of certain things." Without waiting for Derek to ask, he continued, "We've been studying this mural for a very long period of time and only believe that it depicts an angel leading a group of ascetics on a pilgrimage. And perhaps this group's name is Rose Redemption. The river, that runs from source to mouth, represents a cycle, and our interpretation of it is that this pilgrimage takes place over and over again. And now it may be that it is used to identify the angel. That's the idea you gave me, as a Morn used to hide in your body." "Why?" Derek was at a loss. Demon Hunter Colin stared at Jack and said, "The worm left behind by Amorn had the symbol of time, and a circular river is often related to fate. Putting the 2 together, it reminded me of a few books that mentioned something that I'm unsure of their credibility. When the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God, cast his attention on this world, he had many angels around him. Among them were leaders of the angels, kings of angels that were closest to being a god. There were a total of 8 of them, and some of their names have already been lost to history. There are still records of others, perhaps simple or detailed. Legend has it that the sons of God were among these 8 kings of angels. Among them, 2 kings of angels had the titles Angel of Time and Angel of Fate. Derek was immediately enlightened as he asked for confirmation. You believe that Amon is the Angel of Time and that the mural is depicting the Angel of Fate? I can't be sure for now. Only the title Angel of Time has been passed down. As for the Angel of Fate, the records are relatively detailed. Colin suddenly took a deep breath. Immediately, he solemnly said, Angel of Fate, Tail Devourer or Ouroboros. In the evening, within the Odora family's underground structure, Emlyn White looked at the iron-black coffin and said to the ancient sanguine inside, Lord Nibs, I accept the ancestors' mission. Nibs replied in his aged voice, Very good. When do you want to begin? Do you have any wishes that remain unfulfilled? Upon hearing Lord Nibs asking about his last wishes, Emlyn White's calves went limp and he almost regretted it. He stiffened his neck and said, There's no need. We can begin now. Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 67. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The iron-black coffin with its strange patterns lay quietly in the center, and there seemed to be hidden shockwaves in the air that seemed to be silently colliding. Emlyn White stood in the corner and lit the candles according to the normal ritual procedures, burning the essential oils and corresponding herbal powders. A dense and unsteady atmosphere emanated, and after recalling the requirements of artificial sleepwalking, Emlyn lowered his head, began to enter cogitation, and repeated the honorific name of the fool. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the grey fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Amidst his monotone voice, Emlyn gradually entered a magical state. His body felt relaxed and reserved. It felt like he was in deep sleep, but his spirituality was light and energetic as it constantly spread outwards. At this moment, he had a feeling that he was continuously drifting upwards. In the ancient palace above the grey fog, Klein was sitting at the end of the long bronze table, tapping his fingers on the rippling light screen to his side. He was expressionlessly watching the praying figure in amusement. Although it was vague, Klein could tell at a glance that it was vampire Emlyn White. Very courageous, having the drive akin to buying a doll. Klein sighed and didn't respond. He had previously tried to divine the purpose of the sanguines, but he was unable to obtain any effective revelations. The only thing he was sure of was that it had nothing to do with the Aurora Order. This piqued Klein's curiosity, but he wouldn't take the risk of responding to Emlyn White when a lofty sanguine was beside Emlyn. He didn't know if he could grasp traces of the mysterious space above the grey fog and threaten it like blasphemer Amon. He had no intention to confirm it since he was dealing with an avatar of Amon back then. Yet, he was now facing a powerful sanguine's true body. There's no need to take risks on matters of no importance, even if I want to know the real purpose of the sanguines. And it's not like there's no other way. Klein looked at Emlyn White in his state of artificial sleepwalking. He said to himself with a smile, I can delay my response. He planned to wait until tomorrow or the day after. He would suddenly respond when Emlyn White was without protection and when the sanguine had given up. However, there was a premise, which was to first use divination to confirm the degree of danger. Tail Devourer? Just like that river? Derek Berg suddenly thought of something. Demon Hunter Colin solemnly nodded. Yes. It means that we may have stepped into a river that runs from its mouth to source, preventing our departure. Fortunately, this should only be remnants of that Angel of Fate's power. He isn't hiding here. No, it's definitely certain, and it has long since been the case. Derek silently said to himself. At this moment, Colin took out a dark red metal tube. He unscrewed the cap and gulped it down. His light blue eyes quickly turned lighter, tinged with silver. In the end, his pupils seemed to turn vertical, reflecting Jack's figure. A few sparks of silver light lit up in his eyes. They circled or collided at random in an extremely intense manner. Ding! Demon Hunter Colin first stabbed his sword into the ground, and with a flip of his hand, he pulled out his other sword, smearing it with golden, sun-like oil. Noticing this action, Jack's expression immediately changed, as if he was shrouded in a thick shadow. Before he could open his mouth, Demon Hunter Colin moved. He pulled out his sword from the ground, leaving behind a blurry figure. The golden and silver light shone brightly, illuminating the entire underground hall. The light before the little boy was the most intense. After a mournful scream, the darkness once again shrouded the altar. Jack stood in his original spot, without taking even a step. However, the face on his chest had disappeared, leaving behind only a hole where his pulsating internal organs could be seen. A few meters to Jack's side, Demon Hunter Colin genuflected, his two swords hanging down at an angle. In front of him, the face was torn apart, reduced to scattered eyes, a nose, and a mouth. These organs spasmed and bounced like electric shocks, and soon they were still, rotting rapidly like they were supposed to. In an instant, Derek felt an invisible, aqueous barrier around him silently shatter. Almost at the same time, he seemed to have left the swift river and returned to the bank. Looking at the gloomy underground hall and the upside-down deity statue, and at Jack, who had a distorted expression and had fainted due to the pain, Derek felt a sense of joy and relief. He knew that he and the others had finally escaped the cycle of repeating their lives. Derek was well aware that although the final solution didn't seem complicated, it might have taken dozens or hundreds of repeated attempts to find the clues and solution, without knowing any clues or the problem beforehand. In the process, the slightest carelessness could lead to death, and Derek had no way of knowing if a life that was lost could experience a redo, or if they would still revive by the bonfire but would end up dead after escaping this predicament. What's even more serious is that people would always repeat the same choice, which was to say that they wouldn't be able to discover the problem in the first place. Without the corresponding memories and experience, they wouldn't detect any abnormalities even if it was the 1000th time, and they would completely lose themselves in the circular river until they reached the end of their lives due to the normal flow of time in the outside world. At the thought of such a possibility, Derek thanked Mr. Fool wholeheartedly for restoring his memory and giving him a hint. Turning his head to the side, he saw that Joshua and the other members of the exploratory team didn't show any abnormal reactions as they checked the surrounding area in a way that was similar to the 6th exploration. Perhaps it will only be after returning to the City of Silver that they would realize that they've lost a part of their lives from the difference in dates. Derek thought silently. At this moment, Demon Hunter Colin stood up, walked back to the boy's side, and took out another small metal bottle. He then poured the thick black liquid inside onto the boy's empty chest. The liquid quickly condensed into a translucent membrane, sticking to the wound and stopping the flow of blood. "I am Joshua, the both of you are in charge of him," Colin suppressed his throbbing hand and ordered in a low voice. To him, this was the City of Silver's hope for ridding the curse and defeating the prophecy of the apocalypse. Phew. Derek wanted to covertly thank the Fool, but he realized that there was no corresponding prayer gesture. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, the sumptuous dinner glistened under the light of the candles in an alluring manner. Unlike what was imagined in the newspapers and magazines, the dinner for a great aristocratic family wasn't serious, and there was no need for silence. This was a rare occasion for family members to gather together. While eating, they would casually chat about a variety of relaxed topics in order to communicate and solidify their relationship. Audrey sliced a piece of steak which was produced from her ranch, observed Earl Hall's expression, and, without hiding her curiosity, she asked, "Father, did something happen to Prince Edisac recently?" If nothing had happened, then her plan was to pretend that she had heard irresponsible rumors that didn't correspond to reality. It wasn't uncommon for this to happen among the aristocracy. Earl Hall paused, raised his eyebrows, and asked, "What did you hear?" "There really is something." Gleaning information from her father's reaction, Audrey replied with a faint smile, "Some rumors, but they seem to be true." Your favorite stories on n/o/uve/elbinin.com. Earl Hall rubbed his temples and said, "It's not a very serious matter. Audrey, I know what you're thinking, so I don't have to hide it from you. This involves a relatively ordinary scandal of the royal family. To put it simply, Prince Edisac has fallen in love with a commoner girl. This led to the death of an aristocratic descendant. the royal family has blocked the spread of this matter, not wanting to cause too much of a commotion. His wife took a sip of champagne and said, "It seems he isn't mature enough. Mother is being very tactful with her criticism. It does sound suspicious. Has Prince Edisak really gotten himself involved in a dangerous situation that would bring about terrible changes to Backland?" Audrey put on a look of sudden understanding and said with a smile, "This makes me wonder, why would the story of freedom and love involve the death of an aristocratic descendant?" Hibbert Hall kept his head lowered while slicing the tender steak and guessed with great interest, "It reminds me of the complicated love stories that are so common among the believers of the Lord of Storms. It's very common to fight for honor and for a lady. It's a tradition that has been placed into a museum." Earl Hall denied his eldest son's statement. Audrey seized the opportunity and thoughtfully said, "I don't think Prince Edisak is that kind of person, and rumors have already proliferated. Maybe that's not what they really want to cover up." "Perhaps not." Earl Hall ruminated over these words, unconsciously frowning. Knowing when to stop, Audrey didn't say anything else, and she naturally led the conversation in a different direction. She planned on probing her other noble friend about the matter. As a girl that Prince Edisak had once courted, it was absolutely normal for her to want to know the details of the matter. Whether it was curiosity or indignation, they were enough to motivate people to make such an attempt. Being unable to maintain a state of artificial sleepwalking for long, Emlyn White returned to reality in exhaustion. Opening his eyes, he stared at the iron-black coffin, then he said with a mixture of relief and disappointment, "Lord Nibs, there's no response." After a long moment of silence, Nibs finally said in a rather hoarse voice, "Okay. Stay here tonight to prevent any accidents from happening." "All right." Emlyn didn't try to insist otherwise. He spent the night in worry and trepidation, but the night was so serene and unremarkable. It silently faded only when Backland's rare winter sunshine scattered across the window. "What bad weather." Emlyn left Odora's villa, lowered his hat, and mumbled while he got onto a rental carriage. His destination was the Harvest Church south of the bridge. After the carriage continued steadily for some time, Emlyn's vision suddenly blurred and he saw an endless grey fog. Then, to his amazement, he found himself in a mysterious and majestic palace, sitting at a long, mottled bronze table. At the very end of the long table, there was a figure shrouded in a thick grey fog, looking down at him from above. Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 68. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. For a moment, Emlyn White was stiff and his mind was blank, like a marble statue sitting there. Then, he heard the figure leisurely sitting in the thick grey fog indifferently ask, "Why did you pray to me?" Emlyn's mind buzzed and he blurted out, "It's a revelation from my ancestor. She told us through a dream that the apocalypse is approaching and that we need to make preparations. And I am key in this matter. My mission was to pray to the fool." Hearing the undisguised and detailed response, Klein, who had prepared his answers, was at quite a loss on where to begin. This vampire, Emlyn White, had explained everything he wanted to know. A revelation from the ancestor? Didn't the ancient goddess Lilith perish in the Second Epoch, long before the Cataclysm, and have her authority taken back by the Creator? It was precisely because of this that quite a number of vampires tried to pray to the primordial moon, resulting in an extremely tragic outcome. Moreover, Mr. Dorr had also mentioned that the moon card is empty, indicating that, on the one hand, the primordial moon is most likely the embodiment of some other deity or powerful devil, while on the other hand, it indirectly proves that the ancient goddess Lilith has lost her sequence 0 position, which is generally equivalent to dying. Klein instantly connected the dots. He originally imagined that Lilith, who responded to the Sanguine's prayers on particular matters, was a relic from the ancient goddess, such as the uniqueness of the moon pathway. Thus, it would be rigid, passive, and extremely restrictive, but now, its initiative of providing a revelation had overturned his guess. Two possibilities. One is that Lilith is being impersonated by another deity who has occupied a key point ahead of time, preventing any opponents from reaching sequence 0 of the moon's pathway. In essence, the entity doesn't care about the Sanguine, and the provided revelation is a kind of test. The greatest suspect is the goddess who had snatched the title of Lady of Crimson, but she's already sequence 0, corresponding to the star in the cards of blasphemy. Why would she covet the moon? Is it to foil the plans of her enemy? The second possibility is that the ancient goddess hasn't fully perished. As long as no other powerhouse has become sequence 0 in the moon pathway, she is able to use a unique and incomprehensible method to continue surviving, waiting for a chance to make her return, just like the Dark Emperor card's description. And perhaps the goddess had taken the title of Lady of Crimson to foil this situation to a certain extent. Going by this logic, Lilith's recent apocalyptic revelation is her struggle to revive after years of preparation. And the Fool plays a key role in her revelation. If that's true, then in a certain way, it's an invitation for cooperation. But I'm just a sequence 6 beyonder, so how am I to cooperate with a yet-to-disappear ancient goddess? Let Emlyn White join the Tarot Club? The Sanguine are a race with a long lifespan. They have existed since the Second Epoch and must know quite a number of secrets. However, that would be me taking quite a risk. Yes, it would be possible to divine whether or not to pull Emlyn into each gathering ahead of time. Yes, there was a similar apocalyptic prophecy in the sites in the spirit world from Yellow Light Benethan. He also pointed out that the Abraham family's curse would be removed by an apprentice who has the help of a hidden existence. This matches Miss Magician's present stage. She is an apprentice who has received the help of me, the Fool. That's rather interesting. Has every high-level being that's good at prophecies realized that the apocalypse is unavoidable and have seen the Fool's existence and his possible effects? One thought after another flashed through Klein's mind, but his expression didn't change at all. He leaned back in his chair and smiled leisurely. What did your ancestor ask you to pray to me for? The calm voice pulled Emlyn out of his stupor, and he shook his head in a slightly dazed manner. I don't know. At this moment, Klein saw the stars behind Emlyn's chair shift quickly, turning into the symbol of the crimson moon. As expected, the beyonder pathway of the descendants of the ancient goddess, Lilith, points towards the moon. Klein chuckled and said, in a situation with the 7 orthodox gods and so many secret existences, why would your ancestor think that I would be the key to the apocalypse? The Fool's attitude finally made Emlyn White calm down, realizing that he had encountered an incredible event. He had been forcefully pulled into a magical place by a hidden existence. He is the Fool, he isn't actually angry. Is it because I represent the ancestor? I, Emlyn White, am indeed special. I was mentioned by the ancestor, and I received a response from the Fool. With this in mind, Emlyn couldn't help but sit up straighter before saying in deliberation, Honorable Mr. Fool, the revelation provided by the ancestor is this. I, Emlyn White, will become the key in saving the Sanguine and clinching victory against the apocalypse. And all of this will begin from my praying to you. The meaning behind his words was, the key to the apocalypse isn't you, but me. This fellow has such a 8th grader syndrome one side to him. That's right. He has always been very arrogant and feels self-important. Klein lampooned silently with a popular phrase from the past. Amused, he said, the same question, why me and not the 7 orthodox gods or the other hidden entities? I don't know. Emlyn shook his head honestly. Klein thought for a moment, then he deliberately said, actually, I think I understand your ancestor's intentions. She wishes that, with my help, you're able to grow into a true high-level entity and save the Sanguine when the apocalypse happens. Grow? Emlyn said in puzzlement, as you know, us Sanguine have no way of growing on our own. Only through special ceremonies will we gain the bestowment of our elders and relics of the ancestor that allow our advancement. Indeed, it has to be in accordance with the law of beyonder characteristics conservation. In other words, there have to be other ways as long as the basic law is abided to. Klein chuckled. Your knowledge has blinded you, making you unable to see the wider world. Of course, this question will not be answered by me. The answer must be found by you. I will only provide you with an opportunity. He paused for a second, then he said in a condescending manner, do you wish for such an opportunity? Without any hesitation, Emlyn got up and bowed. That is what I wish for. Where did your arrogance go when facing a hidden existence? Why is there only humility? Klein secretly lampooned as he tapped the edge of the mottled long table and said, but you have to adhere to certain matters. Please speak. Emlyn held back his excitement. Klein smiled and replied, you cannot reveal anything related to me to anyone unless you gain my permission. This includes the sanguine who were previously present at the ritual. But Emlyn was somewhat unable to accept the request. Klein asked warmly in a very certain manner, it's likely that Lilith didn't get you to report to anyone afterward? This could be inferred from the fact that there was no prayer content in the revelation. Lee? He directly called the ancestor by her name. It sounds like they're old friends. Emlyn's heart trembled. He lowered his head and replied, no. Klein said with an unperturbed smile, this is a secret deal, which is why I responded after you were free from surveillance. Similarly, you don't need to report this to Lilith as it will let certain people notice it. Seeing Emlyn nod in understanding, Klein added, if you want to be the key to saving the sanguine, you must suffer the pain of the corresponding forms. For example, you will not be understood by others, be slandered, and looked down upon. You can only silently proceed forward in the darkness while being burdened by your heavy mission. Your favorite stories on n/o/lve/elbin.com. The words that were aimed at him made Emlyn White imagine a corresponding scenario. He, who was always mocked by his kinsmen because of his fondness of dolls, had gotten lost and entered the Harvest Church. Stained with traces of shame, he, who had never been valued and thought highly of by his elders, would silently guard his race from the corner, protecting everyone without anyone knowing. Very soon, Emlyn, who had moved himself, respectfully replied, your will pass through the earth. Klein leaned back and said very lightly, I tacitly consented to the establishment of a secret gathering, and it is held right here. Are you willing to join this gathering in search for the method to become powerful to save the sanguine? I am. Emlyn replied without any hesitation. Klein nodded in satisfaction. Do you have any other requests? Emlyn was overjoyed. He said in a hurry, Honorable Mr. Fool, I would like you to help me dispel the psychological cue in me. A bishop of the Church of Earth Mother? I know. Klein calmly interrupted him. He knows. As expected of a hidden existence. Emlyn's head lowered again. Klein let out a soft chuckle. I can help you, but what price are you willing to pay for this? Above the grey fog, he had a very potent spirit vision, and he had previously discovered that the dark-coloured psychological cue within Emlyn White's spirit body had at some point mostly dissipated, thinning out to the point of frailty. Klein had intended to resolve the problem by referring to the ritual used to resolve similar problems in the Book of Secrets, but the situation now led him to believe that a secret deed ritual with the Dark Emperor card and the purification of the Sun brooch would thoroughly disperse Emlyn White's psychological cue. Price? Emlyn thought about it for a moment, but he couldn't think of anything that would interest a secret existence like the Fool. Seeing this, Klein took the initiative to say, I'm very interested in some of your sanguine history. You can use that in exchange. The sanguine's history? After a moment's thought, Emlyn agreed. You can think about what you would like to describe first. Heh. Before that, you need to choose a code name from them. Klein conjured the unselected Major Arcana tarot cards on the surface of the long bronze table. Emlyn White scrutinized the cards with interest and said, the moon. I choose the moon a card. Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 69. Chapter for 69, Vampire Queen. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Above the grey fog, inside the palace that looked like a giant residence. The moon. Emlyn thought hard about what part of the sanguine's history that he should tell the Fool. He and the ancestor are old friends, so he must know what happened before the cataclysm, so I don't need to repeat it. In the 4th and 5th epoch, the glory of the sanguine wasn't rare, and there was a lot of history to talk about, but there was only one most important point. Emlyn quickly came up with an idea. From what he knew, the Fool was likely an ancient god before the cataclysm. Due to certain reasons, he didn't perish and had slept till today, gradually in the process of recovering. This explained why no such secret existence had appeared in the Sanguine records, that had a history spanning millennia, until his honorific name suddenly spread. After some deliberation, Emlyn straightened his back and said, after the cataclysm, the Sanguine left the center of the historical stage of the northern and southern continents and became nobles of different empires and dynasties as individuals instead of as a race. They either governed a territory or guarded a castle in a key area. This continued until our queen, Blood Moon Queen, Ornia, who led us out of the era of darkness, became the wife of the Trunsoist dynasty's Night Emperor. She gathered all of the Sanguine together, and the Sanguine became important supporters of the dynasty. At that time, Lunds Augustus and Faesags Einhorn had to politely address our queen as Her Majesty. In that era, Queen Ornia was the symbol of beauty. If there was a magic mirror that could answer questions, then the answer to who is the most beautiful of them all would be her. The more Emlyn spoke, the prouder he became. He went from being reserved and serious to becoming extremely talkative. A magic mirror that can answer questions, isn't that a Rhodes? I wonder if there are any members of the machinery hive mind who were so bored out of their minds to ask the question, mirror, mirror, on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? I wonder how a Rhodes will answer. Klein sat in the same posture, smiling as his thoughts wandered. After droning on and on, Emlyn's expression turned serious. All of this shattered in the War of the Four Emperors. The Night Emperor perished, along with the Queen. The Sanguine suffered a terrible blow, and while trying to reap the final fruits of victory, the four noble families Augustus, Einhorn, Sauron, and Castia split the empire, destroying the royal family which was lacking in high-level beings. The Sanguine had no choice but to retreat to an uninhabited mountain to hide in the shadows so as to maintain the continuation of our race. Just as I expected. The seven gods were already the seven gods during the War of the Four Emperors. Klein thought of the statue of the six gods in the Tudor ruins. Fortunately, the seven gods were fractured back then and the four countries attacked each other. After paying a certain price, we finally escaped the disaster. At this moment, Emlyn was in a rare state of being roused. He looked at Klein and said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, do you have the time to listen to my description of Blood Moon Queen's deeds and the glory the Sanguine used to have? That will be a heavy tome formed by pages of glorious expositions. I can repeat everything in them. It looks like you can continue on indefinitely. I used to think that you were a vampire who liked puppets and didn't know much history. I didn't expect you to be so professional and academic. No wonder you always believed the Sanguine to be noble and are proud of it. This kind of guy who doesn't like going out really will delve into deep research into a topic he's interested in. Furthermore, vampires have a sufficiently long lifespan." Klein hesitated, prepared to decline Emlyn's offer in a euphemistic manner. Although he had no lack of interest in the history, time didn't allow him to listen to them all. "It's enough." Klein smiled and said, "I like a fair and equal exchange, so I won't let you say anything without reaping rewards. In the future, when you have the chance, you can use your relevant history to trade for what you want from me." "All right." Emlyn felt lost for a moment. This was the first time he had the opportunity to tell someone else about the glory of the Sanguine. Normally, in order to hide his identity, he wouldn't be able to show off to the humans. As for the members of the Sanguine, all of them knew what needed to be known, and he wasn't in charge of educating the newborns. Klein didn't say anything else and resumed his supercilious attitude. "All right, you can go back now." A dark red light immediately lit up in front of Emlyn White's eyes, quickly devouring him. After a short period of dizziness, he found that he was still sitting in the rental carriage. Soon after, he saw an illusory goatskin parchment and gained the knowledge of how to request help from the Fool via a secret deed ritual. "When I'm free in the afternoon, I'll immediately hold the ritual at home and ask Mr. Fool to dispel my psychological cue." Emlyn was suddenly excited. He waited until the carriage arrived at the Harvest Church before calming down and paying for the ride. After entering the cathedral, he was relieved to see that Bishop Utravsky was there preaching to the few believers of the church. He no longer felt as vexed as he usually felt and felt rather relaxed. In this state, he suddenly thought of something. Father Utravsky has never seemed to stop me from finding a way to dispel the psychological cues. What exactly is on his mind? East Borough, in a greasy coffee shop. Klein, who arrived at the scheduled time, was enjoying wheat bread with fresh pea lamb stew while he listened to old Kohler's report of the information he had gathered over the past week. It was a pity that there was no valuable information inside. When old Kohler was done, Klein thought for a moment, then he pulled out £2 worth of bills and pushed them over. "You already paid me just now." Old Kohler jumped in shock and waved his hands in front of him. Klein chuckled and said, "Within this week, I'll be heading south for a holiday. After a year of hard work, it's time to rest for a while. I might take 2 to 3 weeks before I return, so I'll pay you in advance. Heh, don't forget to help me gather information." Okay. Old Kohler accepted the notes with a mixture of joy and gratitude. At this moment, he had already thought of how to spend the new year. He planned to buy the cured ham he had been reluctant to buy and match it with his bread. "I really can't stand the wait." "Thank you, Detective Moriarty." He swallowed his saliva without realizing it. Klein picked up his hat, hesitated for a moment, and said, "You should have noticed that East Borough has been a bit chaotic recently. Don't take risks just to find out more information. If you notice anything wrong, immediately hide and avoid getting yourself involved." He was rather worried about the matter surrounding Prince Edisak, so he wanted to give old Kohler a reminder. "I understand." Old Kohler patted his chest and said, "I'm very timid. I won't take the risk." "Very good," Klein praised. Then he remembered the laundry maid, Liv, and her 2 daughters, Frigga and Daisy, who loved to read, and wanted to change their fates before he said whilst in thought, "Watch out for Liv's family. Don't let them be bullied. If there are any outbreaks in East Borough, take them to a safe place." "Outbreaks? You mean the workers' resistance?" Old Kohler asked, puzzled. "More or less," Klein answered vaguely. This was the limit of what he could reveal, otherwise, it would be very easy for him to be suspected by others or the sealed artifact itself. In a room with large and small dolls, Emlyn White came home at noon and sat in his chair, enjoying the gloom created by the curtains. He looked around and clenched his fists. "I'll cheer for myself." With that, he rummaged for materials with spirituality and began to write the honorific name of the fool, as well as the corresponding symbols and magic labels. After some hustling and bustling, he tried the secret deed ritual. His spirituality gradually dissipated, as if he had arrived at an immeasurably high place. Vaguely, he saw countless shadows of ineffable shapes, 7 colors of light that seemed to contain immense knowledge, and the grayish-white fog that stood above everything. Above the boundless grey fog, there was an ancient palace that was impossible to see clearly. Seated inside the palace was a person shrouded in grey fog. Then, Emlyn saw a figure of golden majesty and holiness, as well as black wings that blotted out the sky behind it. He didn't even have time to count the number of pairs of mysterious wings before he felt himself quickly floating upwards, making contact with that golden figure. "Ah!" He screamed miserably as he held his head and rolled on the ground, emitting green smoke from his body. It took a while for Emlyn to calm down, and then he heard the deep voice of the fool echo in his ears. "Your psychological cue has been lifted. Is this what it feels like to dispel a psychological cue? It's really painful." Emlyn sat on the floor, panting, his neatly combed hair falling in disarray. Atop the grey fog, Klein thoughtfully nodded and said to himself, "Indeed, the sun-broached purifying and dispelling effects can also harm vampires." He had calculated in advance that the sunlight needed to remove the weakened psychological cue wouldn't severely damage Emlyn, so he couldn't be bothered switching to a more complicated approach. And now, the result was indeed consistent with his expectations. After taking care of this matter, Klein took off the topaz pendant on his left wrist and planned to perform a divination. It is suitable to head to the Red Rose Manor this afternoon. After chanting 7 times in his mind, he opened his eyes and saw the spirit pendulum standing still and not spinning. The difficulty of divining something that involves a Grade 0 sealed artifact or a corresponding powerhouse is too high. I'm unable to obtain any effective revelations. Klein sighed, knowing the gist of the matter. Then, he started to divine if it would be suitable to head to Red Rose Manor tomorrow afternoon, but he received the same signs of failure as an outcome. It's always said that divination isn't omnipotent, and it has now been proven. I have to decide on my own. I have to take this step, otherwise, there's no way for me to leave the stage unnoticed so as to go behind the scenes. The earlier the better. I can't delay it, otherwise, this matter might become completely impossible to recover from. As his thoughts churned, Klein came to a decision. He immediately returned to the real world, put on his double-breasted frock coat and half-top hat, and he walked out of 15 Minst Street, heading for Prince Edisac's Red Rose Manor. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter for 70. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Outside Red Rose Manor, Klein walked out of the carriage whilst carrying his cane. He closed his eyes and calmed himself as he looked at the red-uniformed soldiers standing guard at the door. Since sealed artifact 0-08 has been making coincidences to stop the woman with the sapphire ring from meeting me, there shouldn't be any exception today. There's no need for me to worry about running into her. As long as I fool Prince Edisac with my acting, everything would be fine. Klein thought quickly and walked towards the entrance of the manor. After being searched and handing in the gun holster and revolver, he followed a male servant's lead and walked across the grey slate road, past a fountain spewing clear spring water, and entered the main house. They arrived at the second floor and arrived outside the room that was supposed to be a solarium according to the layout. During this entire process, Klein had his heart in his mouth, worrying that something unexpected would happen. He was afraid that the situation would develop in the worst possible manner. Knock. 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 After knocking gently on the door, a male servant approached the door and whispered, "Detective Moriarty has arrived." After a full 10 seconds of silence, a heavy voice came from inside the room. "His Highness has invited him in." The door creaked open and warmth spread outwards, with a temperature that was warmer than the hallway. Under the watchful gaze of the two tall guards, Klein stepped onto the thick, patterned yellow carpet. He took a few steps forward, skirting the cabinet that separated the inside from the outside, and he saw Prince Edisac sitting by the full-length windows, enjoying the rare winter sun of Backland. The round, impressionable face didn't have the slightest trace of a smile, and this naturally created a solemn and repressed atmosphere. Because of the combination of the elegant fireplace and the metal pipes, the room was warmer than late spring. Prince Edisac wasn't wearing a coat, and his upper body was covered with a white shirt with cuffs which resembled blooming flowers and a pale yellow vest. Seeing this, Klein was actually secretly relieved, because the woman wearing the sapphire ring wasn't accompanying the prince. Thus, he quickly stepped forward and bowed. Edisac held a steaming cup of black tea in his hand and didn't invite Klein to take a seat. He maintained his previous expression and asked in a deep voice, "Any results from your investigation?" "No, my divinations, my spirit channeling, my interviews, my investigations all tell me that Talim died of a heart attack," Klein said with a heavy, painful expression with obvious signs of self-blame. "I'm just too weak in every aspect. Your Highness, you should hire a stronger and more powerful helper. Why don't you get someone better?" He added silently inwardly. It was only then that Edisac seemed to clearly notice Detective Sherlock Moriarty's face. He felt as if he had aged considerably, as though he had been unable to sleep at ease for a long time. It wasn't an illusion, because Klein had used his faceless powers before he left to adjust the state of his face, making his skin look dry and lusterless. He made his beard appear messy and his eye bags bigger, darker, and more obvious. Edisac was silent for a moment before he put down the white porcelain cup with a golden inlaid rim. "I understand. It's indeed like forcing a square peg in a round hole. I will have someone else follow up on the matter. Prepare an investigation report and don't leave anything out." "All right." Klein inwardly clenched his fist and quickly took out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Your Highness, there's no need for you to wait, as I always have the habit of recording things in writing." After instructing the attendants to take the report, Prince Edisac casually flipped through it and put it aside. "Is there anything else you need?" "No, Your Royal Highness, please allow me to take my leave." Ah, right, I will be heading south for some time. I want to use the warm sunlight there to melt the pain in my heart. Klein sighed in response. It's a New Year's custom of many in Lun. Prince Edisac nodded slightly and turned to Funkel, the old butler. Send Detective Moriarty out and get him a carriage. The nearest town to Red Rose Manor is a 15 to 20 minutes walk. I'll have to hire a carriage when I get there. Yes, Your Highness, the old butler bowed and said politely. Klein didn't let down his guard and quickly took his leave. He followed the old butler all the way to the entrance of the manor and took back his underarm gun holster and his weapon. Less than a minute later, he was seated in a Red Rose Manor carriage. He leaned against the carriage wall and watched the manor turn smaller as the distance grew. Klein relaxed and let out a long breath, letting his hanging heart calm back down to its original position. He knew that he had left the center of the stage. After that, it's time to bid farewell to Backlund and head south, a complete curtain call. After that, I'll change my looks and sneak back in secret. He calmly considered his subsequent plans. Suddenly, his spirituality stirred as his spirituality tensed up as he saw the door to the carriage quickly open and then silently close. Before he could respond, he saw a figure quickly outline itself. It was wearing a heavy black dress and had a sapphire ring on its hand. Sapphire ring. Upon seeing this scene, Klein, who was at the juncture of a flight or fight response, narrowed his eyes and sat back down, not daring to act rashly. This was a terrifying person who possessed a Grade 0 sealed artifact or was a demigod of a similar level. It's really true that the more afraid you are of something happening, the higher the chances are of it happening. 0-08 or something else, what happened to the coincidences you create? Klein's spirit and body instantly tensed up as he could only watch helplessly as the figure appeared in front of him. The lady's age was completely different from her dressing style. She looked about 18 or 19, had a round face, slender eyes, and a gentle and refined temperament. Deep down, she was sweet and was an outstandingly gorgeous beauty. Klein was surprised for a moment, before immediately recognizing her as he blurted out. Trissy. Isn't this the fellow who had gone from being instigator tries to witch Trissy? How did she go from being wanted to becoming Prince Edisac's woman? How did she, a member of the Demonist sect, end up by Prince Edisac's side? And she even has a Grade 0 sealed artifact or a mystical item of a similar level. Your favorite stories on n/o/uve/elbinin.com. When he looked again carefully, he saw that there was something different about Trissy. Her facial features, which weren't outstanding alone, were softer and more delicate, but when placed together, they were stunning. Hearing his surprise, Trissy became happy instead of being alarmed. She revealed a sweet smile and said, "You know me." "I knew you know me. A detective with Beyonder powers definitely pays special attention to the wanted posters." She looks very happy. Klein cautiously asked with doubt and caution, "What do you want?" He clearly remembered that the person before him wasn't a good person. Tries had single-handedly created the tragedy of Alfalfa via instigation, while Trissy had caused the deaths of many innocent civilians in Tingen City. Trissy pursed her lips into a smile and said, "Very simple. Quickly report me to the Nighthawks, the mandated Punishers, or the Machinery Hive Mind. Get them to come here and capture me." Calling the cops on yourself? This transvestite, this woman must be insane. Klein was a bit at a loss. He soon figured out the meaning behind her message. Trissy would rather be locked up behind Channy's gate than stay at Red Rose Manor. She's trying her hardest to get out of here. Simply put, she believes that this place is more dangerous and more despair-inducing than being caught by the Nighthawks and mandated Punishers. Klein tried his best to control his expression and asked in a deep voice, "What are you afraid of?" Trissy stood dazed for a second before she widened her eyes and said with her unfocused eyes, "There's someone manipulating my life. There are always coincidences that horrify me after they happen. And I'm becoming less and less like myself." Saying this, the corners of her mouth curled up as she said, "Can you imagine? Being someone who loves those shy and cute maids, can you imagine the pain when I wake up in the morning in the arms of a naked man? That's why it's best to stay away from being an assassin or witch. Klein couldn't help but imagine such a scene, and his heart palpitated for a moment. Trissy continued with a self-deprecating smile. I thought that by working hard to advance, to become pleasure, that I would be able to free myself from that weird state. Hence, I sought people to help me search for the corresponding Beyonder ingredients, but the outcome only turned worse. Sometimes, I forget a lot of things, but they end up really happening. I endure the disgust, seduced Talim, and tried to get him to help me escape. Who knew that I ended up killing him with a curse without me even realizing it? Do you believe that? Heh, they even changed my name. They wanted me to completely abandon my past self. No. Absolutely not. They thought I could only overcome the coincidences for a short period of time and that I would soon get back on track. Humph, it was just an impression I deliberately created for them, so I have managed to meet you, Mr. Detective. Pleasure? Demoness. Ingredients. Klein suddenly remembered that in the Beyonder gathering held by old Mr. Eye of Wisdom, Isengard Stanton, there had been a person who had requested to purchase the main ingredient of the Demoness of Pleasure potion. With him being aware of the formula, he instantly noticed it on the spot, but he had chosen to ignore it. He gradually forgot about the matter with time. So that was Triss's helper. Was she already by Prince Edasak's side back then? Why do I somehow feel that her present smile looks so miserable but beautiful? A Demoness of Pleasure is sick. Klein took a breath, his thoughts in a jumble. As he was organizing his thoughts, he asked casually, "What did they change your name to?" Trissy furrowed her beautiful brows as she answered with a somewhat blank look in her eyes, "Trissy Cheek." Trissy Cheek. 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 Klein suddenly raised his head, his whole body turning numb once again, as stiff as a marble statue. At this very moment, there was only one page of Roselle's diary that was madly reverberating in his mind. The 5th of June. I obtained an ancient book. It actually mentions the primordial Demoness name. Her name is Cheek. Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 71. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Cheek. The goosebumps on Klein's skin surfaced uncontrollably as he looked at the beautiful young lady with her misty eyes and furrowed eyebrows. The goosebumps were distinct and were accompanied with cold sweat. At this moment, he felt as if he had returned to Tingen, back to the Blackthorn Security Company, and was about to activate his spirit vision to observe Megos and the baby in her womb. The fear that resulted from his instinct was so clear that it felt like a giant hand tightly gripping onto his heart. He finally understood that the thing interfering with the grey fog and his divinations wasn't a Grade 0 sealed artifact or a mystical item of the same level. There was something even more terrifying hidden within Triss's body. The symbol of the apocalypse, the primordial Demoness. No, she isn't the primordial Demoness yet. Otherwise, I would have already lost control just by being together with her, turning into a pile of squirming rotten meat. She's in a very strange state. Triss's brows eased as her eyes regained their focus. As she looked at Klein, who didn't dare to move at all, she gently lifted her right hand, allowing her slender white finger to slowly slide down from the side of her body. With a bit of grievance, seduction, and malice, she laughed and said, "If you can inform the Nighthawks, the mandated punishers, and the machinery hive mind about this matter, and I happen to meet you before they arrest me, I don't mind letting you know what true pleasure is." Klein's gaze subconsciously followed the movement of her fingers, and all sorts of mind-blowing details surfaced in his mind. They aren't considered big, but they are very firm. What am I thinking? What am I looking at? Is this the seductive powers of a Demoness of Pleasure? Ignoring the fact that you were once a man, even if you were a true lady, without having committed many heinous crimes in the past to lessen the psychological rejection I have, I wouldn't dare to. If you were to suddenly awaken as the primordial Demoness, even the fool can't handle that. Klein silently sighed, raised his head, looked at the carriage's wooden roof, and said, "Do you think that I, an ordinary low or mid-sequence Beyonder, would have the ability to escape the pursuit of the royal family? I think they've already discovered that something is wrong, and they're about to take action." Trissy felt somewhat smug that Klein didn't dare to look straight at her. She chuckled softly and said, "I'll try to escape and divert the main pursuing force. Although the remaining ones are still very powerful, it's not impossible to deal with them. I believe that you will fight with all your might for the sake of your own life. You have great hope." With that, her figure quickly disappeared, as if someone had wiped it away with a rag. This was different from Sharon, as it wasn't a return to a normal wraith state, but a direct form of invisibility. Bam! The carriage door opened and then closed. The sweet fragrance that remained drilled into his nose, and Klein retracted his gaze, his face sinking. Even now, his arms were still trembling slightly, as if he had contracted some disease. If it wasn't for his rich experience, even though he had faced the son of an evil god in the real world, with a belly in between them, he, who knew what the name Trissy Cheek meant, wouldn't have been able to bear the terrifying pressure and would have collapsed on the spot. It was akin to having a rubber band stretched too tightly to the point of tearing. It seems like Trissy still doesn't know what's happening to her body. She also doesn't know the meaning behind the name Cheek. Klein quickly calmed his thoughts, looked out the window, estimated the distance, and counted the time. His spiritual intuition and corresponding experience told him that doing anything in such a situation was better than nothing. Therefore, with the danger of being silenced at hand, he was prepared to try his best to save himself. 3, 2, 1. Klein suddenly opened his eyes and snapped his fingers. At the edge of the road, a small fire ignited on a tree with only withered branches left. The flames quickly soared into the sky. Several matches inside his pocket, that Klein had intentionally divided up, burst into flames, and a crimson color engulfed his black attire. His figure disappeared from the interior of the carriage, and he walked out from the flames by the roadside. Pa! 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 He kept snapping the fingers on his left hand repeatedly, his figure constantly flashing through the sparse, withered forest. He rode the flames and rapidly arrived deep in the forest, which couldn't be seen from the outside. Then, he paused and pulled out the accessory hanging around his neck. He always knew very clearly that there were hidden elements behind this matter. Therefore, for his visit to Red Rose Manor, he abided by the rules of a magician. He had made some preparations beforehand, such as separating his matches and carrying a number of his mystical items on him. Among the mystical items, the biological poison bottle and the sun brooch were involved in the Capim and Wraith incidents. Therefore, out of caution, he left them above the grey fog. As for the all-black eye which was left behind by Nimblewright Master Rozigo, it was difficult to get past the manor guards, hence, it was met with the same treatment. Finally, other than the 3 kinds of bullets, purifying bullets, demon hunting bullets, and exorcism bullets of purification, he only brought along 2 mystical items. The first was the master key that allowed him to pass through obstacles. The side effects of getting lost could be offset by dowsing. Furthermore, it looked like an ordinary key, so it wasn't easily discovered. The other item was a key element of Klein's preparations, Azek's copper whistle. Simply put, when he faced a danger he couldn't handle himself, he could ask for the help of a powerhouse. After that encounter, whether I recognized Trissy or not, I am definitely on a kill list. There's a high chance that I've been targeted by 0-08. There won't be any negative effects getting Mr. Azek's help. Well, that's if 0-08 has been behind all the coincidences. Klein raised the cold ancient copper whistle and put it in his mouth, blowing on it. Without a sound, he activated his spirit vision and saw the white bones that gushed out from the ground like a fountain. He saw the nearly 4-meter-tall giant messenger taking form. It lowered its head and looked at him with his eye sockets burning with black flames. That huge body gave Klein a sense of security. He took out the pen and paper he carried with him and wrote a word, "Help." Next, he folded the paper and stuffed it into the messenger's hanging palm. After the messenger had disappeared, he put away the copper whistle, deliberately put on a prayer posture, and quickly chanted the honorific name of the fool. "Honorable Mr. Fool, my investigations have borne fruit. The woman Prince Edisac fell in love with is witch Trissy from the Demoness sect. She has already advanced to Demoness of Pleasure, and the upper echelons have changed her name to Trissy Cheek." After quickly making the report, Klein didn't bother to hide his identity and immediately took 4 steps counterclockwise to head above the grey fog. Then, he retrieved the scenes of him praying, and he threw it into the crimson star symbolizing Miss Justice. He tried his best to feign a mocking tone and added in a supercilious manner that was congruent with the style of the full cheek, he, that's the true name of the primordial demoness. After doing all this, Klein immediately returned to the real world, ready to run for his life. He had only taken a few steps when his eyes suddenly lit up. He subconsciously raised his head and saw several meteors burning with raging flames falling from the sky, tearing through the sky and enveloping the entire forest. At that moment, the scarlet light shone into Klein's eyes, giving him an indomitable feeling. He had never expected that the person he was up against would send meteorites from the sky to silence him. On a yellowing notebook, a seemingly ordinary quill wrote, "For unknown, inexplicable reasons, the Dallas meteor shower arrived at the planet 2 days early. A portion of them just happened to land in the forest where Detective Sherlock Moriarty was hiding. Yes, just happened." Updated chapters on novelbin.com. Tuesday afternoon, in Audrey's study. The teenage girl, who was about to reach adulthood, was listening intently as Mrs. Escalante explained the connection between the intersection of spectator and telepathist powers with mysticism psychology. Beside her feet, Susie was sitting there attentively. Suddenly, she saw the endless grey fog and a blurry figure in a prayer position in what appeared to be a forest. Soon after, the words reached her ears. Prince Edisac. The Demonis sect. Which Trissy? Demonis of pleasure? Trissy cheek. Audrey automatically filtered out the irrelevant details and noticed the most important words. So that's the reason. The person Edisac fell in love with is a demoness. Furthermore, many of the demonesses are transformed men. Why do I feel like laughing? Is this why he will bring danger to Backland? Well, I have to warn Father. But what method or excuse should I use? Audrey tried her hardest to control her expression and gaze, but her mind wandered. At this moment, she saw Mr. Fall leisurely sitting at the end of the long bronze table. She heard him say in a gentle tone with a hint of ridicule in his voice, "Cheek, he, that's the true name of the primordial demoness." The true name of the primordial demoness. The primordial demoness. As her mind buzzed, Audrey's expression instantly collapsed. What's wrong? As an observant telepathist, Escalante immediately noticed that something was wrong with Miss Audrey. Audrey thought for a moment and didn't hide her concern as she said, "Miss Escalante, I just remembered something bad. I should have told my parents before, but I forgot. It will lead to terrible and serious consequences. For example, the destruction of Backland. How few of the millions of people who live here, regardless of them being nobles, the middle class, or the poor, will survive?" Audrey pursed her lips. Her concern couldn't be hidden in her sparkling, emerald-like eyes. Escalante frowned and said, "Will it be too late to do it now?" "It's better than not doing so. Miss Escalante, please wait for me." "No, you should leave first." Audrey entered her spectator state and calmly made her decision. Then she got up and left the study and went into the hallway. "Father has gone to the House of Lords. Only Mother is at home. But what should I say?" Audrey frowned slightly. She didn't slow down, nor did she increase her pace. Next to her were her personal maid and her huge dog, Susie. Gradually, she had an idea. When she arrived at the living room where her mother was, she had already made up her mind. Taking a light breath, Audrey felt an unusual sinking sensation on her shoulders. Then, without hesitation, she knocked on the door. Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 72. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Lady Caitlin was sitting on a sofa in the activity room, with the deputy butler, butler's assistant, and the attendant of the corresponding services seated opposite her. She was meticulous as she gave instructions on various things to take note of for the dinner banquet that night. This continued until her daughter, Audrey, came to her side. "Mother, I have something to tell you." Audrey swept her gaze across the other people in the room. On the way to the activity room, she had felt a slight tremor, but she didn't discover anything unusual. Lady Caitlin looked around and nodded. All of you can return later. The activity room turned silent very quickly, and even Susie was signaled by Audrey to leave. You should stay by my side more often and learn how to handle matters. Although you don't lack such content in your family lessons, it's still profound knowledge on how to effectively combine theory with practice. Lady Caitlin, who looked to be in her early 30s despite being in her 50s, smiled and educated her daughter. All right, my little angel, what is it? Audrey tried to produce the elegant smile she'd practiced in etiquette class, but she found herself with a heavy, nervous smile. She pursed her dry lips and directly said, Mother, I've been hiding something from you and Father. Oh? Lady Caitlin tilted her head, waiting for a further explanation. Audrey's words were a little staccato at first, but then they immediately became smooth and fluent. I'm already a Beyonder, the kind of person who possesses miraculous powers by consuming a potion. The blonde Lady Caitlin raised her eyebrows lightly and answered without any hint of surprise, I know. Both your father and I know about it. Ooh? Audrey was momentarily at a loss as to how to continue. Lady Caitlin covered her mouth and laughed. You took so many mystical ingredients from the vault, and you are so naive to think that your father and I didn't notice. By your father's side, in this villa, and in the fief of our family, there's no lack of Beyonders. They may be a result of a simple employment relationship, or they may have been assigned by the Church of the Goddess, or they may have been members of the Hall family. His Majesty has tacitly agreed to such matters, and we have also tacitly consented to your little adventures. Sigh, you will eventually grow up and mature. Your father and I will never be able to protect you under our wings forever. You will have to face certain matters alone, so having additional powers to aid you as a trump card is good too. Yes, according to the general knowledge that I'm aware of, the initial stages shouldn't be that dangerous, and advancing will require 1 to 2 years, or maybe even 3 years. So, your father and I aren't too anxious, and we intended to wait until you become an adult to give you a word of warning so that you can stop at your present state. No, Mother, your general knowledge is wrong. You don't know the acting method. If I have all the ingredients, then I can become a Sequence 7 psychiatrist before the new year. Moreover, I do not wish to stop. The death of Duke Negan has made me understand that the world isn't as stable and peaceful as I thought it was. I want to have the power to protect all of you at critical moments. Mr. Fall is gradually recovering, and evil gods are making repeated attempts to descend. Although I'm still immature and lack the necessary knowledge, I can sense the hidden, indescribable dangers from these matters. Audrey had always known that she couldn't avoid the problem of taking Beyonder ingredients from the vault, but she thought that perhaps by chance, her parents weren't aware of the specific effects of those items. At most, they would suspect that she was getting deeper and deeper into her mysticism enthusiast circle. After releasing the burden in her heart, she paid no notice to her mother's exhortation and said, Mother, I later joined a secret organization, one that's more academic and doesn't worship evil gods. Please forgive me for not being able to say its name and details, but I've already made an oath. Without waiting for her mother to ask, she cut to the chase. I received word today that the commoner girl who Prince Edisac has fallen in love with is a demoness. I don't know what kind of plot they are plotting. The first 2 sentences of hers didn't contain any absolute connection. The former referred to the psychology alchemists, while the source of the latter was the Tarot Club, which was Mr. Fool. Through this arrangement of sentences, every word she said was true, one that could be confirmed through divination. However, it would make people believe that her news came from the secret organization known as the Psychology Alchemists. The smile on Caitlin's face gradually disappeared as she solemnly asked, Demoness? She didn't know much about the mysterious world, but the very word was enough to make her sense the evil and become uneasy. Audrey quickly nodded. Yes, a demoness of pleasure. Find updates on no/velbin.com. And what scares me even more is that her name is Trissy Cheek. What's wrong with that? Her mother asked, puzzled. A member of that organization has seen the name cheek in an ancient book. Audrey said the lie that she had already planned for. Whether it was her tone, her words, the details of her expression, or her body language, they were all flawless. In the fourth epoch or earlier, it's a name that belonged to the primordial demoness. Immediately after, she gravely added, "That's an evil goddess." Lady Caitlin didn't understand what the primordial demoness meant, but she knew exactly what an evil goddess meant. She couldn't sit still any longer and quickly replied with a question, "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure." Audrey didn't doubt Mr. Fool at all, but she couldn't say so openly. "No matter what, I think it's necessary to seek the royal family, get the Beyonders of the Church of the Goddess to confirm the matter. If it involves an evil goddess, it's always the right decision to be cautious." Caitlin looked up at her daughter in surprise. "Audrey, you've grown up." If it weren't for the urgency of the matter, Audrey would have pretended to be reserved upon hearing such praise. She would first modestly wheedle, then return to her room in glee. She might even twirl into a dance. But now, she couldn't care about that at all. She quickly let her worry and nervousness surface on her expression. "Mother, can you help me hide the truth? I heard that the Beyonders of the Church and the royal family abhor secret organizations that aren't a part of them." "Well, you can say that it was news which father received. He should have plenty of channels for information." Caitlin stood up and gave her daughter a hug. "Don't worry, neither your father nor I will involve you in this. Your father won't be back until evening. I'll first let the hidden guards appear, pretend that he sent a message, then I'll get the Church of the Goddess to send Beyonders to protect our family." "All right," Audrey replied happily. At that moment, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. She was exhausted from maintaining her prolonged high level of tension. Looking at the few burning meteors crashing down at a high speed and enveloping the whole forest, Klein actually had the thought of waiting helplessly for his doom in despair. Even if he continuously used flaming jump, it would be impossible for him to escape the forest and the dangerous epicenter before the meteor shower landed. Moreover, the weak body of a Beyonder from the Seer pathway didn't allow the possibility of him withstanding a head-on meteor strike. Even a zombie that wouldn't be wounded by a revolver would immediately be turned into mincemeat under such an attack. Moreover, it would become charred black. Flaming jump. The yellow-white light shone into the depths of his eyes, quickly giving Klein, who had not given up, an idea. In a situation that was depicted in seconds, he didn't hesitate. He did whatever that came to his mind. Pa! After silently calculating the distance, Klein snapped his fingers and ignited all the remaining matches in the matchbox. A streak of crimson-red light soared into the sky, quickly enveloping his figure within it. Klein disappeared without a sound, appearing in the flames above the meteor. Whoosh! The meteor rapidly descended. The moment he leaped out of the flames, he was away from the meteor's vicinity, entering a region of air with frighteningly high temperatures. At the moment when he used his Beyonder powers to jump, Klein was immune to ordinary flames even if the temperature was rather high. However, upon exiting that state, he had to do his best to avoid the flames via flame controlling. Otherwise, he would suffer burn wounds and even burn to death. In addition, the hot air wasn't within his jump range. Pa! Klein snapped his fingers again, causing the air at a critical point to ignite. He phased into another flame, trying to avoid the first blast upon the meteorite's impact. However, no matter how many times he tried and how many risks he took, he still couldn't escape the danger. There were only two choices, to jump to a point away from the forest and suffer the meteorite's resulting blast, or to jump around like an acrobatic, waiting for the mushroom cloud to swallow him up. For a moment, Klein thought he could see himself being torn apart, scorched black with flames still burning over his body. A thought flashed through his mind, and his vision suddenly changed as all the colors saturated. The reds became redder, the yellows became yellower, and the whites became whiter, just like a strange oil painting. The oil painting seemed to be different from the real world, allowing Klein to watch as the meteorite slowly crashed to the ground. That patch of the forest was instantly destroyed, and the ground clearly quaked a few times. Plumes of smoke that were mixed with flames rose up, forming a strange mushroom cloud. Such an impact didn't affect Klein because the blast simply didn't enter the superposed, still oil painting world. Klein was stunned at first before he saw the human figure next to him. The figure had bronze skin with a medium build. He wore a long black suit and a half-top hat. He had a pair of aged brown eyes, soft facial features, and a tiny mole below his right ear. "Mr. Isaac!" Klein cried out in joy. He finally knew what scene the revelation from the divination he made a long time ago corresponded to. It corresponded to the present. The sea of blood represented a perilous situation, and being pulled up by Mr. Isaac meant being rescued because of him. Just as Klein's words left his mouth, Isaac waved his hand, grabbed his arm, and pushed his way through the deep layers of saturated colors. The ordinary-looking quill was no longer writing on its own, and its surface had dimmed a little. The solemn-looking middle-aged man with only one eye grabbed it and quickly wrote as if he was channeling a spirit. It was obvious that Isaac Eggers had yet to recover all his memories and strength. While attempting to travel through the spirit world and the astral world, a latent danger appeared as a result of this problem. Hence, he and Sherlock Moriarty found themselves landing near Ince Zangwill and his friend. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 473. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Everything around him was like an illusion. The colors were saturated and superposed as they quickly receded. As soon as Klein came to his senses, observed, and experienced this wonderful passage, he felt Mr. Isaac's hand, which was holding his hand, tremble slightly. Before he could even react, he felt a strong sense of weightlessness. His body couldn't help but plummet as he even began spinning. The colors of red, yellow, white, and black around him faded rapidly, and Klein fell, hitting the solid ground hard. The impact left his head spinning and his internal organs churning. Mixed into his vision were bits of golden stars as his vision was restored to normal. To his left was a bottomless dark valley that resembled the legendary Devil Abyss. On the right was a grey stone wall that continued to extend upwards, as if supporting the entire region. There was no sun, no clouds, and no fog. Some light came from the luminescent moss growing in different places, and darkness and heaviness were the primary tones of this world. Klein pushed himself up with his left hand and nimbly jumped up. He found that the ground beneath his feet consisted of properly paved stone which could accommodate 2 horse carriages travelling in parallel. It was definitely not naturally formed. One end of the road spiraled down into the dark crevices, while the other led to the top. From time to time, it was possible to see the domed hallways and halls inside the walls. Klein raised his head, but he couldn't see the highest point. His vision was completely blocked by the grey stone wall. Suddenly, he had an epiphany. He and Mr. Isaac had fallen underground, into the ruins of an ancient civilization. Is it another area, or are we still near Backland? As soon as Klein thought about it, he heard Mr. Isaac say in a low voice, "Leave here first. Head up." Ah? Before Klein could understand the meaning behind his words, he saw a flash of light from the side, instantly forming an illusory door that opened outwards. The door seemed to be made of bronze. It wasn't real enough, but it was unusually heavy. On the surface, there were countless strange patterns and indistinct symbols. With a creak, a crack appeared in the door. Pale, bloody arms reached out from the crack, one after another. In addition, there were also greenish-black vines with baby faces and sleek tentacles with protruded eyes. It's very similar to the effect of Miss Sharon's mystical item. While he was in thought, Klein noticed that the arms, vines, and tentacles were no longer as crazy as before. They had calmed down and stuck to the ground, completely unlike their former appearance of madly pulling a Sequence 6 zombie into the door. Immediately after, the gap between the doors widened and a human figure emerged from it. The figure wore a pure black clergy robe, and his facial features were clear and distinct like an ancient, classical sculpture. His hair was dark gold in color, his eyes were dark blue, and he had a high nose bridge. He wore a bonnet which was popular with the elderly, and his sideburns were somewhat grey in contrast to his middle-aged appearance. Looking at the figure's completely lifeless eye, Klein suddenly recalled the name of the person who had just arrived. Ince Zangwill. the former archbishop who had directed the Tingen incident and dealt heavy damage to the Nighthawks team, as well as being the owner of sealed artifact 0-08. Almost at the same time, Klein turned around and, following Mr. Azek's instructions, fled towards the top of the road. He knew full well that being a Sequence 6, he would only serve to be a burden and distraction in a clash between demigods. In this race for time, false modesty and pretentious words were unnecessary. They would harm both him and his companion. Tap. 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 As there was nothing he could ignite underground, all Klein could do was grit his teeth and run as fast as he could. While running, he heard Azek's calm, gentle voice. "Run all the way out of here. Don't worry about me. I've recalled a lot of things, and I know that I once remained in a particular sequence for a very long period of time. That sequence's name is Undying." Updated chapters on novelbin.com. Tap. 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 Klein circled around the cliff and entered a dark domed corridor. The walls on both sides were engraved with mottled murals. At that moment, he heard a dignified and hoarse voice reverberate from where he previously was. "Teleportation is prohibited here." A figure had arrived beside Zangwill without anyone noticing. He was floating in midair in defiance with the laws of physics. He wore a gorgeous gold mask. And Zangwill didn't attack immediately. Instead, he glanced at the bend where Klein's figure had disappeared. Sequence for Night Watcher of the Church of the Evernite Goddess's pathway could grant a certain amount of bad luck to others, but Zangwill, who had just silently blessed Klein, realized that things like Klein slipping and falling into the ravine didn't happen. Not only that, Zangwill seemed to be hallucinating as well, as he saw a thin, greyish-white fog. Without having the luxury of time to think, he withdrew his gaze and cast it back to Azek. Tap. 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 Running at full speed, Klein suddenly stopped in his tracks. His spiritual intuition told him that there were people ahead of him beyond us. They were most likely the guards here. After contemplating for a bit, he reached out with his left hand and wiped his face. At the same time, crisp sounds emitted from his body as his body grew 7 to 8 centimeters taller. By the time his left palm left his face, he had turned into a single-eyed middle-aged man with dark golden hair and a high nose Zangwill. Recalling the other party's demeanor, Klein used an illusion to change his clothes before quickly walking around the corner and entering a large hall. There were 4 guards in dark black armor, their gazes keen. Klein's face was calm as he walked over. He deliberately spoke in a hoarse voice and sternly said, "Someone has sneaked in here. I'm looking for him. Did you discover any clues?" The leader of the guards first examined him before lowering his head and saying, "Mr. Zangwill, nothing happened here." "Okay." Klein nodded slightly, walked past them, and left the hall. During this entire process, although he remained highly nervous with his back drenched in sweat, he appeared to be calm and reserved. He looked no different from Zangwill, be it his appearance or his aura. Relying on his faceless powers and his running speed, he quickly passed through 3 checkpoints and arrived at the end of the building. There was an illusionary door formed by pure ghostly blue light. Apart from that, it was completely sealed shut. Although he was worried about the demigod battle between Mr. Azek and Zangwill, Klein remained hidden in the shadows outside the room. He patiently spied for a while and found that someone had passed through the ghostly blue light while another person had used it to leave. He noticed that those who left had to show something that looked like a badge before they could get permission from the 4 guards to enter the door of light. "I don't have time to wait for the next person with a badge. I can only take the risk. The battle over there could end at any moment. Even if it doesn't, the search order will be sent over here quickly." Klein quickly made his decision, once again walking into the room with the likeness of Zangwill. Something has happened outside. He had no confidence in mimicking the former archbishop's voice, so he could only express himself with deliberate hoarseness as an indication that he had experienced an intense battle. The guards who were left confused by the news didn't react until Klein approached them. They reached out their hands to stop him. "Mr. Zangwill, where is your pass? Don't waste any more time." As he spoke, Klein pulled a badge from his pocket and thrust it into the man's hand. This calm performance made the rest of the guards relax. The moment the guard who had received the pass looked down, Klein suddenly lunged forward. Just as he landed on the ground, he quickly did another roll and went straight through the ghostly blue door. Only then did the guard realize that the badge in his palm had rapidly faded, turning into a piece of paper. On the top left of the piece of paper, there was a rather commonly seen blessing recently, Happy New Year. The abyss-like crevice was filled with an illusory, pitch-black liquid. Moreover, the surface of the water was still bubbling without stopping, and many pale-skinned arms were wildly extending outwards. Zangwill had a general idea of ASIC standards, and he was neither surprised nor afraid, for he had a demigod to help him at the moment. What worried him the most was another problem. 0-08, which was forcefully developing the story, could backfire on him at any moment. At that moment, he swept his gaze past the corner of his eye and was shocked to find that the quill 0-08 had left his pocket without him realizing it. It was floating in front of the grey rock wall, fervently writing lines of words. In a fierce battle, there would always be a variety of accidents, such as Zangwill's belt snapping and having his pants drop. The ghostly blue light filled Klein's eyes, constructing a passageway that overlapped with layers of light between the deep darkness and the roaming invisible creatures. Klein didn't bother to observe his surroundings as he scrambled to the end of the passage. He stood up, straightened his clothes, restored Zangwill's stern expression, and stepped into the rippling screen of light. After a moment of being mentally adrift, he found himself in another room, which was also occupied by quite a few guards. Something went wrong underground, keep an eye out. Do not allow anyone entry, Klein calmly instructed, walking towards the door at an unhurried pace. Yes, Mr. Zangwill. The guards replied respectfully. At this moment, the guard from before passed through the ghostly blue light and shouted loudly, "There's a problem with that Zangwill from before." Everyone turned to look at the door, but Klein was nowhere to be seen. Tap. 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 The guards immediately split up into several groups to search in every direction for their target and notify their companions. The scene momentarily turned rather chaotic. One of them had just rounded the corner when he saw Zangwill's back. Subconsciously, he pulled out his sword that coruscated with lightning and performed a forward cleave. OF. The figure floated away weightlessly and became a splintered paper figurine. At the same time, two loud bangs could be heard. Pale golden bullets passed through the visor that wasn't pulled down and accurately hit the guard's head. Before he could even cry out, the guard collapsed to the ground with a thud, convulsing. Klein stepped out of the shadows in the corner and expressionlessly slipped the revolver back into his underarm holster. After burning the paper figurine, he quickly dragged the guard to an empty room and changed into black armor, switching his appearance to the fallen guard. Then, he picked up the lightning sword and left the room, closing the wooden door behind him and running forward in a panic. He was going to notify every guard along the way that there was a problem with Zangwill. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter for 74. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Inside the solarium of Red Rose Manor. Edisac Augustus stood by the full-length window, looking at the indifferent Trissy with a gloomy face, and he said in a voice that was like a volcano about to erupt, "Why did you run away again?" Trissy looked past him and beyond the window, chuckled, and answered with a question, "Did you see the meteor shower? Did you feel the trembling of the earth?" Behind her, porcelain and other items in the cabinet had fallen onto the thick, soft carpet. The old butler, Funkel, was standing beside her. "It's not too rare for that to happen," Edisac replied in a low voice. Trissy raised her eyebrows slightly. "You are very dull." "Then let me be frank with you. I am a demoness." Prince Edisac's expression didn't change at all. He turned to the old butler and said, "Guard the door and prevent anyone from entering." "Yes, Your Highness." Funkel gave Trissy a cold look and walked out of the solarium. When he heard the door close, Edisac exhaled slowly. "Trissy Cheek, you prefer to be called Trissy. I know you're a demoness. The person who helped you purchase the Beyonder ingredients failed. What you received was provided by me. I don't mind that my princess consort is a witch or a demoness. I've even seen your wanted poster. Trissy was surprised at first, but she then revealed a mocking smile. You sure know a lot. Did you know that I was once a man, and that my real name is Tries? What? Edisac's eyes widened, and he tilted his head a little, as though he couldn't believe what he had heard. Upon seeing this, Trissy couldn't help but laugh. She laughed so hard that she frantically bent back and forth like a lunatic. Ha ha, you didn't make a mistake. I was once a man. I used to be like you, and the thing down there was longer and thicker than yours. However, the witch potion had forcefully changed my gender. Are you disgusted? Does it give you goosebumps? She vented the word she had been repressing all this time before taking 2 steps forward. Edisac instinctively retreated, his Adam's apple moving involuntarily. No, it's not like that. You're a real woman. There's no problem. I can definitely confirm that. He mumbled to himself, then he raised his voice and said, From the moment I met you, you were a real woman. I don't want to know what you were like in the past. I can pretend that nothing like this happened. What I love is the present you. Stunned, Trissy raised her hand to wipe away her tears of laughter. You're a really pathetic man. Do you still not understand? Our meeting wasn't a coincidence. Even your interest. She paused in disgust and continued, even your interest in me was a result of someone else's arrangement. Don't you think that everything happened too quickly? I believe in love at first sight, but I don't believe that it possesses such powerful bewitchment properties. You act like the main character in a third-rate romance novel, becoming obsessed with love from just one meeting. You fell in love with a stranger, forgetting the type of person you once liked. That's crazy. Prince Edisac's eyes went blank as his eyes turned agape, but he didn't speak. His body suddenly swayed, as if he had finally awoken from a long dream. Why, you are indeed my type. But my reaction, it's really too exaggerated. The corners of Triss's mouth curled up, and she turned her head to the side to let out a sneer. What a pathetic man, to have what you like being arranged by someone else. It's like you're a puppet on strings. Don't you understand? You're a person that can be sacrificed, and I, as well as being a hostage for the cooperation between the royal family and the demoness sect, am also a necessary disguise for this deception. I possess an important item of the demoness sect, and under your strict supervision, I can be destroyed at any time and result in the loss of the treasure. This is the sincerity of our cooperation, and once the matter is exposed to the other 3 churches or the military, the development of this matter will be very simple. Prince Edisac secretly kept a demoness due to his lust. After knowing of his heinous sins, he shoots himself in the mouth. Then, all the problems would be covered up. No. Edisac blurted out. Then, with a twisted expression, he asked, why are they cooperating with the demoness sect? How could a hostage who might be abandoned at any moment know? Trissy gave a self-deprecating laugh. That's the whole reason behind why I want to flee. She lowered her head and chuckled in a low voice. Her body trembled slightly from the laughter. After a few seconds, she raised her head once again, curled the corners of her mouth, and said, What do you want to do with me? Strip me down and throw me onto the bed? No, you've probably formed a psychological resistance. Actually, I don't mind giving you some warmth right now. It's not a shameful thing for 2 poor people to comfort each other. Prince Edisac darkened his rotund face and looked at Trissy silently for nearly a minute. Suddenly, he closed his eyes, pointed to another side and said, You can leave. Leave through that door. Trissy raised her eyebrows in astonishment. You're letting me go? Yes. Edisac turned to look out the window and slowly replied, I'll stop Funkle. As for whether or not you can escape from the other pursuers, that will depend on your own strength and luck. A dazed look flashed in Triss's eyes a few seconds before she quickly ran towards the hidden door. Before leaving, she couldn't help but look back. What about you? Edisac didn't turn his head, but he continued to stare out of the full-length windows as if searching for the shadows of his past. Find updates on no/velbin.com. He smiled and said, "Me? Let me live in this beautiful story and welcome its final end, good or bad." Trissy took a breath and, without further ado, went through the secret door. In a quiet room inside St. Samuel Cathedral, one of the 13 archbishops of the Church of the Evernight Goddess, the person in charge of the Backland Diocese, St. Anthony Stevenson, had received an urgent telegram from Earl Hall's residence. This bearded old man with deeply recessed eyes had an extremely clean appearance. Even though he wore a black and red archbishop's robe, he didn't give off a gloomy feeling. However, anyone who faced him would shudder from the bottom of their hearts. It was as if their spirituality was dominated by fear, or as if they were facing an unknown existence lurking deep in the darkness which stared back at them. Trissy cheek. Primordial demonis. St. Anthony lightly patted the paper and immediately stood up. The light around him suddenly vanished, as if swallowed up by the gloom of the room. All the worshippers in the cathedral instantly felt the coming of night. Everything quickly returned to normal as St. Anthony appeared in front of the Channy's Gate beneath the cathedral. Today, the one leading the team was the spirit guide, Daily Simone. Without waiting for her to ask, Archbishop St. Anthony instructed in a deep voice, "Make preparations. The process shall begin. I'm awakening a sealed artifact." He wanted to use 0 to 17. He wanted to use that terrifying sealed artifact to confirm and deal with the Trissy matter. And this was the only Grade 0 sealed artifact stored outside the Holy Cathedral. Only 2 of the church's upper echelons knew that it was in the Backland Diocese. "Yes, Your Grace." Daly was startled for a second, then she immediately responded. While waiting, St. Anthony closed his eyes as a portion of 017's information surfaced in his mind. Number 17. Name EXXXXXX. Danger grade 0, extremely dangerous. It's of the highest importance and of the highest confidentiality. It is not to be inquired, disseminated, described, or spied. Security clearance, Pope, Team A researchers, an Archbishop of the Backland Diocese. Note, when the Archbishop is transferred out of the Backland Diocese, the corresponding memories have to be wiped out using sealed artifact 1 to 29. Sealed method, the seal is completed through the combination of 1 to 29 and 1 to 80. Description, this isn't an item. This is a living angel. Her appearance is beautiful with black hair and eyes. Looks like a young woman, but her actual age cannot be estimated. She doesn't have the wings recorded in canon. Just from her appearance, she is no different from an ordinary person. She does not have the ability to think and has lost all sentience. Anyone and everything that comes close to her will completely disappear. Through divination and other methods, it can be confirmed that they're still alive but are impossible to locate. Currently, 1825 methods have been attempted, with every one of them failing. 017's range of influence will expand and contract without any pattern. Currently, it has caused more than 70 researchers to vanish. Warning, she cannot be used. Appendix 1. This sealed artifact first appeared in the Pale Era of the 4th epoch. Exact year, missing. Exact date, missing. Exaction location, missing. Appendix 2. Based on the information, she has been awakened 5 times. By passing on the message to search for the Zangwill imposter, Klein, with the help of divination, overcame the interference of the master key and ran all the way to the exit given to him from the revelation. He knew very well that with a carpet-style search, the corpse in the empty room would soon be discovered, so he had to race against time to get to the exit. A faceless powers should be matched with a mystical item that can destroy corpses and clean up my tracks. Having gained true knowledge from practice, it didn't take Klein long to cross the checkpoints and patrolling teams before he arrived at the exit where the divination pointed him to. However, what made him even more surprised was that there were no guards here, only a heavy stone door standing there by itself. What's going on? Why is there no one guarding the exit? Was my divination misguided, or are the guards outside? As his thoughts raced, Klein found a corner and took off his armor, restoring his lightweight and agility. Then, he came to the stone door that opened outwards and groped his way to the corner of the left wall. After carefully checking with a gold coin, Klein took out the ancient bronze key. He leaned it against the wall and gently twisted it. Water ripples appeared as they spread out slightly. Klein silently passed through the wall, without taking the door. The first thing he saw was the natural light that fell from the dome, which meant that this place was really an exit. Klein carefully stood motionless as he quickly adapted to the light. He saw neat but mottled grey stones under his feet and thick pillars in front of him. In the middle of the hall, four hooded figures knelt around what appeared to be an altar. Soon after, Klein heard a soft but gentle female voice. "Mr. A, are you ready?" Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 75. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Mr. A? Mr. A of the Aurora Order? Klein, who had intended to cling towards the walls and shadows and proceed towards the door, shrank back silently. Zangwill should be working with some faction of the royal family. Those who are able to excavate and hide such a large underground ruin near Backland must be one of the main powers in the Lun Kingdom. With Zangwill and 0-08 participating in this matter, the Church of the Goddess can be ruled out. Although the people of the Lord of Storms are a bit reckless and male chauvinists, it's unlikely that they will work with the Demonist sect. At least until now, there have been no Beyonders who appear to be of the Sailor pathway. In the same way, the Church of Steam and Machinery aren't likely suspects. Even the Aurora Order is involved. What are they trying to do? Klein leaned his back against the wall and slowed his breathing, thinking and listening to the conversation in the middle of the hall. After a short period of silence, a hoarse voice sounded, "It's done." The answer was so concise that Klein couldn't make out what they were planning. The melodious and pleasant voice from before laughed in a low voice, "You don't seem to trust us very much." "That's right," Mr. A answered bluntly. Heh, then I'll be frank and describe our goal and why I'm seeking your cooperation." The gentle female voice didn't sound angry at all. "We've done certain things and left behind clear traces. Before we're discovered by the churches of Evernight, Storm, and Steam, as well as the military, we must do the corresponding cleanup, and this requires your help. Yes, it seems like you don't really understand what I mean, so let me give you an example. Imagine you performed a heinous crime like murder in a house, so what's the best way of eliminating any evidence and clues? There's no need for that. It's our goal to have others witness such an act," Mr. A said indifferently. "As expected of a member of the Aurora Order. They're all a bunch of lunatics." Klein made a preliminary identification of the speaking man to be Mr. A, who had killed the Inti's ambassador. "Suppose it were me, not you." The clear, soft female voice had a faint wheezing sound. After a second, Mr. A replied, "Burn that house and bury all the clues there." The clear and gentle female voice had a smiling tone. "That's exactly what we planned. I'm in charge of committing arson, while you can use this opportunity to go with this development to create a passageway or vessel, so as to allow your Lord to descend upon this world. And the only price you guys have to pay is to bear all the infamy and gain the most enmity from the military and the three churches. But I don't think you would mind that. As long as we can welcome the return of the Lord, even if we're abhorred by every single force, we won't show any sign of cowardice." Mr. A's tone no longer appeared indifferent and distant. "Arson? The Aurora Order will take this opportunity to complete the ritual for the arrival of the true Creator? This is probably the third time. Why did I bump into this again? What a fucking bad twist of fate." Klein couldn't help but curse inwardly in Chinese. At this very moment, he was extremely curious and wary against the things that were plotted by this particular royal family faction in Zangwill and the Demonist sect. It was terrifying enough to even use the descent of the true Creator as a scapegoat. Perhaps they've kept some cards up their sleeves and will eventually destroy the Aurora Order's ritual in the end and destroy all the other factions except themselves, Klein calmly thought while feeling tense. "It appears like you have no other questions," said the gentle female voice. "This place is sufficiently well hidden and can be used for the required setup. You can do your ritual here at ease and won't need to worry that it'll be interrupted before you succeed. As for the things outside, we've already finished our preparations a long time ago. It's just waiting for the ignition of a spark. If you still have doubts, then you can make another round of checks. Just as Mr. A was about to speak, Klein heard a dull thud. It was the sound of the door opening. Who permitted you to enter? Didn't I declare that no one is to approach this area? The gentle female voice suppressed her rage. Lady Despair, there's an emergency. Someone has infiltrated the basement. The higher-up sent me to arrange for a follow-up and close the corresponding passages. A male voice with a distinct Backland accent responded very quickly. The so-called Lady Despair maintained her silence for a few seconds, as though she was communicating with an unknown existence to confirm the situation. Finally, she said without changing her tone, "Go back inside. Don't come out again, nor allow anyone out. Wait until further notice." "Yes, Lady Despair." The man ran towards the stone door, with a heavy thud sounding in the background. Your favorite stories on n/o/uve/elbinin.com. From the place where Klein was hiding, he could clearly see the stone door leading to the back area. He waited for 7 or 8 seconds before a figure of normal height and build appeared. Phew! The man took a deep breath, stretched out his hands, and bared his teeth as he pushed open the heavy stone door with a ferocious expression. In that instant, Klein had completely taken in the man's appearance and characteristics without missing a single detail. This was the beyonder power of a faceless. That man's skin was reddish-brown, and he was clearly of southern continent descent. His facial features had no special characteristics, making it difficult to remember him. Due to him gritting and baring his teeth, he revealed a portion of his teeth. The third tooth on the upper left of his mouth flickered with a golden light. It was a fake tooth. This? Klein, with the spiritual intuition of a seer, frowned as he felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Very quickly, he used his skills to recall the source of his familiarity. The Hanged Man had once requested the Tarot Club members to find a man with reddish-brown skin and a thick Backland accent who had the third tooth on his left missing. The man's name was Balin, and he was involved in the escape and disappearance of many colonial island slaves. And at this moment, the man in front of Klein was almost identical to the Balin that was described by the Hanged Man. The disappearance of the colonial island slaves. The many tribes of the southern continent vanishing into thin air. Balin's appearance here. Capim, who took a large share of the underground slave trade, was protected by 4 beyonders suspected to be of the Arbiter pathway. Among them, the strongest was a Sequence 6, and even a Sequence 5. Capim constantly targeted relatively innocent girls in his abductions. The passing of the Grain Act, the improvement of the textile machines all resulted in a large number of people losing their jobs. Many female textile workers silently left East Borough after receiving new jobs, not leaving any clues. The scattered dots instantly formed a line in Klein's mind, pointing directly into the depths of the earth. What are they up to, that they need such a large number of people, as well as so many pure and innocent girls? A ritual? An extremely terrifying ritual that takes a very long period of time while being held in secret? Klein's pupils suddenly contracted. Creak! Bang! The stone door closed and Balin disappeared from his sight. The hall was silent for a few seconds before Mr. A's deep and hoarse voice rang out again. I smell an accident. Let's begin. We need to hurry before it arrives. Lady Despair responded slowly, that's exactly what I was thinking. But I need you to send me to East Borough. East Borough? Klein had a bad premonition. No problem, Mr. A answered with a lack of emotion. Under the hood, a transparent and blurry book appeared in front of him. Accompanied by a distant and indistinct chant, he said, I came, I saw, I record. The book quickly flipped open and stopped at one of the pages. Soon after, it began to emit a light blue and illusory light. The light enveloped the white-robed Lady Despair, causing her figure to blur at first, then becoming indistinct. In an instant, Lady Despair saw countless indescribable silhouettes. She discovered lustrous brilliances which contained the bright and pure splendor of endless knowledge at the highest point. Her body was being dragged forward by a strange force as she rapidly tore through space. Not long after, she left her original spot and arrived at a secluded, uninhabited, and filthy corner of an alley. She pulled down her veil to cover her face and looked up into the sky. The afternoon sun had once again been obscured by clouds and fog, turning pale and dark. The light yellow fog wasn't particularly thick, and it sank down to every corner of Backland, giving off a slight choking sensation amidst its coldness and moisture. It's a pity that the haze didn't reach the point when it's in its worst and calmest state. The accident that happened to Trissy, the sudden and temporary loss of control over 0-08, the appearance of Azek, the destruction previously caused by Dark Emperor, these had complicated matters, garnering the attention of others. It forced the operation to be brought forward to today. Lady Despair surveyed the area, walked out of the alley, and into the streets. Her steps were slow, as though she were wandering in a sea of fog. Wherever she passed, the fog would unnoticeably thicken. Tinged with an iron-black color, it silently lowered the range of one's visibility. As she left the street, a sallow-faced tramp in an old jacket suddenly coughed violently and fell to the ground. The two poor people close to the tramp retreated in horror, and then they covered their throats with their hands as they gasped for air. It was as if they were suffering from severe lung disease or bronchitis and could no longer breathe. A haze which was a mixture of iron-black and pale yellow colors descended upon East Borough, the dock area, and the smoke-spewing factory district as it continued to spread throughout Backland. Various scenes in the distance were drowned, and even the towering clock tower was only a pale shadow. One by one, workers and poor people felt the discomfort as they fought against the cold, and the disorderly tramps fell one after another in the woman's wake, their lives as fragile as the bubbles formed during laundry. Lady Despair's expression was calm and gentle, as though she were finishing a work of art. Like an ordinary person, she walked among the pedestrians as she chuckled and said in a low voice, "The Lun Kingdom's history will remember this day." The Great Haze of Backland. The dark valley had been completely covered by the black, incorporeal water, but 0-08 didn't stop writing. It fabricated ridiculous and terrifying stories wherever it could land its tip on. The dropping of pants didn't affect Zangwill's performance, because he was wearing a long robe, perhaps having anticipated a similar accident. The imperative mage stunned Azek in the spot, robbing him of his two most powerful beyonder powers at the last moment, truly a great assistant in every meaning of the word. However, the stacked door of the spirit world and the underworld were attracted by Azek's characteristic. It began being stirred by the powers of their battle, causing unpredictable changes. At that moment, an unknown existence was attracted, resulting in him passing by. He took this opportunity to extend his hands into the real world. Oh no! He caught Zangwill. In mid-air, two bloody arms which were covered in squirming flesh suddenly appeared behind the clergyman robed Zangwill. They caught Zangwill's shoulders, dragging him into the void and into the spirit world. Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 76. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Light suddenly faded from where Zangwill disappeared, staining the area with the richest and deepest darkness. In the darkness, the sounds of melodic chanting could be heard. It was quiet and tranquil, hypnotic even. Even the countless pale arms flailing upwards underneath the pitch-black water seemed to slow down, no longer as frenzied as before, as if they had won redemption for their souls. In such a dark night, a figure walked out. It was none other than Zangwill, who had just been dragged into the spirit world. Compared to before, he had lost the bonnet on his head. The clothes on his left shoulder were tattered, and a piece of flesh had been torn off. Faint yellow pus bubbled out one after another. His eyes were no longer indifferent, but filled with pain, as if he was suffering some unimaginable torment. The 0-08 quill continued writing. Some might feel regret, while others might rejoice. Zangwill had the umbilical cord of the evil god, which came from the baby in Mego's womb. It was from the true creator, and through the umbilical cord, he successfully escaped from the restraints of the unknown existence and forcefully returned to the real world, but as a result, he had lost that mystical item. In addition, he would suffer the ire of the evil god spawned from having failed to descend for a short period of time. This made his strength appear like some kind of commodity in a department store during a change of seasons, with only 55% left. Yes, this number is extremely accurate. In a street in the depths of East Borough, Old Cola hurried back to his rented apartment, carrying some ham in a paper bag. He looked around warily, afraid that those ravenous wolves around him would pounce on him and steal his New Year's gift. He had seen wolves back when he was still in the countryside, but to his surprise, he was able to experience that familiar feeling in Backland. It's still too expensive. I can only split the cost with someone else and cut it into pieces. This is enough for the New Year holiday. I can eat 2 slices of ham for every meal. 3 slices, no, at least 5 slices of ham. I can cut some of them off and stew them together with the potatoes. I don't even need to add salt. With this in mind, Old Cola looked at the ham in his arms. Seeing the white spots mixed in with the red meat, his throat couldn't help but twitch and he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. As he walked, he felt the fog around him grow thicker. The cathedral's clock tower that was still relatively clear in the distance was gradually swallowed by a mixture of iron black and pale yellow colors. Even the pedestrians around him were reduced to blurry shadows once they were 10 steps away. Old Cola suddenly felt like he has been forgotten by the world as he raised his palm to cover his nose. Why does the fog smell so bad today? He muttered, and he quickened his pace. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Old Cola felt his face heat up and his forehead start to burn. His chest tightened, his throat felt uncomfortable, and soon he was experiencing difficulty breathing. Have I fallen ill? Damn it, I still want to have a good New Year's, and now I can only send my savings to the clinic or hospital. No, perhaps I'll be fine with some sleep. I'll be fine sleeping with a blanket over me. Old Cola silently muttered to himself as his head grew hotter and hotter and his senses became more and more muddled. Gasp! 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 He heard his own labored breathing, and his hands went limp as the bag of ham fell heavily to the ground. Old Cola instinctively bent down to pick it up, but he ended up falling to the ground. He held the bag of ham and tried to keep it in his arms. At this moment, he thought there was thick phlegm rushing up his throat, blocking it, so he fought back, making panting sounds. Thud! Old Cola began to see, through his blurry vision, that a few steps away, someone else had also fallen and was gasping for breath. He was about the same age as him, in his 50s, with white sideburns. Suddenly, he understood that he was about to die. It reminded him of his own wife and children who, like him, suddenly got infected with the plague and died shortly after. It reminded him of the time when he had been hospitalized. The patients in the same room were still chatting and laughing that night, but they would be sent to the morgue early the next morning. It reminded him of the friends he had known as a tramp, many of which had disappeared over the course of the winter until they were found stiff under a bridge or some spot which was sheltered from the wind. A small number died from suddenly having food. This reminded him of the days when he was still a decent worker, when the neighbors in the neighborhood would suddenly die like this. Some of them died from headaches, some of them died from accidentally falling into molten steel, some of them died from all sorts of painful, bloating ailments. Some of them even collapsed silently in the factories, one batch after another. This reminded him of what he had heard from a drunk in the bar when he was scrounging for information. People like us are like straw on the ground, falling when the wind blows. It's even possible to fall on our own even without the wind. The wind is coming. Old Cola suddenly had such a thought. He clutched the bag of ham tightly as he groped the pocket of his old jacket for the crumpled cigarette he had always been unwilling to smoke. What he couldn't understand was why his healthy body would suddenly become ill. It wasn't like he had never experienced such a dense fog before. What he couldn't understand was the reason for him suddenly collapsing just as his life was back on track, moving in a direction that was sufficiently nice for him. Furthermore, he had been paid in advance by Detective Moriarty to buy his long-awaited ham for the new year, and he was looking forward to tasting it. Old Cola fished out that crumpled cigarette, but he no longer had the strength to lift his arms again as they slammed heavily to the ground. He used the last of his strength to shout out the words that had been building up inside of him, but he could only let the frail words linger at his mouth without producing them. He heard his last words. He heard himself ask, "Why?" In an apartment at the edge of East Borough, Liv hung up the last piece of clothing she had washed and waited for it to dry. She looked at the sky outside, somewhat unsure of the time due to the thick fog which had appeared without her realizing it. "Anyway, it's still early, and we've already done the laundry." Liv's expression grew heavy. It wasn't a good thing to finish work too early. This meant that they could rest, but it also meant that they didn't have enough work, which would imply inadequate income. Liv took a deep breath, turned around, and looked at her eldest daughter, Frigga, who was wiping her hands and casting her gaze towards the vocabulary notebook in the opposite room. "It's almost New Year's. Most of our clients have left Backland and have gone on vacation elsewhere. We can't go on like this. We have to find new work." As she spoke, she walked towards the door. During this period, the rich will host banquets one after another. They definitely won't have enough servants and might hire temporary kitchen cleaners. "I plan on inquiring. Frigga, you stay at home and pick up Daisy when the time comes. We need income, but so do the thieves, bandits, and human traffickers of those prostitutes to welcome the new year." In the East Borough, every woman who didn't work in the factories had to be skilled or aggressive enough in order to survive. Frigga answered briskly, "All right." Her mind was already on the desk and vocabulary notebook next door. Liv had just opened the door when she stumbled and fell to the floor. Cough. 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 She broke into a violent coughing fit as her face flushed red, with every joint in her body experiencing an unbearable ache. Frigga ran over in panic and squatted beside her. "Mother, what's wrong with you? Mother, what's wrong with you?" "It's nothing." "Cough, I'm fine." Liv began to find it harder to breathe. "No, you're sick. I'll take you to the hospital immediately." Frigga tried to help her mother up. "It's too expensive, too expensive." "Cough, let's go to a charity hospital." "A charity hospital, I can wait. It's not a big problem." Liv gasped a response. Frigga burst into tears and her vision blurred rapidly. But at that moment, she felt her lungs burn, and her body went limp as she fell to the ground with Liv. "What's the matter with you, Frigga?" "Cough." "You're sick too?" Liv shouted anxiously. "There's money, cough in the closet, cough in the hole in the wall. You have to be quick. Go to the hospital. Get a good doctor." Frigga tried to say something, but not a sound came out from her mouth. Her eyes slanted up to the door beside her. It was their bedroom, their bunk beds. On top of it was her favorite table and her vocabulary notebook. Her body suddenly began to twitch. Liv's coughing stopped. Within the public elementary school at the edge of East Borough, the fog still wasn't thick yet, but many students had already started to cough. The experienced teacher on duty immediately ordered, "Quick, to the cathedral. We need to head for the cathedral next door." Daisy stood up in a panic and ran with the crowd to the cathedral next to the school. Suddenly, her heart palpitated as she felt the horror of losing something important. "Mother!" "Frigga!" Daisy turned her head sharply, wanting to rush home against the crowd. However, she was stopped. She was caught by her teachers and forcibly dragged towards the cathedral. Daisy struggled and screamed at the top of her lungs, "Mother! Frigga! Mother! Frigga!" In East Borough, the dock area, and the factory district, the old or those with latent ailments collapsed in the fog in succession like felled trees, while those who came into contact with them felt as if they had been infected by the plague. They died quickly, and even the able-bodied adults and children also felt slightly unwell. In their eyes, the light yellow and iron-black fog was like the descent of death. On the Tuesday of the last week in 1349, Backland was shrouded in haze. In the corner of the hall, Klein pressed himself against the stone wall so that he wouldn't be discovered by Mr. A. Soon, he heard muffled groans and could smell the scent of flesh and blood. "Give up your lives for the Lord," Mr. A's voice suddenly sounded. Thud. Thud. The sound of figures collapsing entered Klein's ears, and a strong spirituality fluctuation appeared and constantly reverberated. Mr. A sacrificed his for attendance. Just as this thought appeared in Klein's mind, illusory layers of weeping sounds could be heard. Some of them were calling out for their mothers, others coughing violently, and some moaning in pain. As half of an expert at mysticism, Klein seemed to see a series of disgruntled and transparent figures entering the ritual one after another, followed by the years of numbness, despair, pain, and resentment from the dock area, factory district, and East Borough. Has it officially begun? Klein closed his eyes and leaned his back against the wall, his right hand clenching and relaxing. For him, the best thing to do at this moment was to slip out of the hall and flee into the distance while Mr. A was concentrating on the ritual. His right hand loosened and tightened before relaxing many times in a row. 7 or 8 seconds later, Klein opened his eyes, the corners of his mouth curling upwards in an exaggerated manner. Your favorite stories on n/o/uve/elbinin.com. He reached out his hand to grab the revolver, turned around abruptly, and dashed out. Dressed in his black double-breasted frock coat, he raised his right hand and aimed at the altar. Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 77. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The first thing Klein saw was the altar, which was surrounded by layers of light, and the tall, thin figure standing in it. The figure took off its hood, revealing a beautiful, devilishly feminine face, with a left chest, shoulders, abdomen, and thighs all covered in squirming, sticky, disgusting flesh and blood. His surroundings were filled with illusory, transparent shadows that brimmed with feelings such as numbness, despair, pain, and depression. Beyond the altar, the 4 figures which were praying had fallen. Their skin was shriveled, and their bones were tightly wrapped, like corpses that had been eroded for many years. At the top of the hall, rays of light pierced through the air, quickly entering the altar through the stone pillars, floor, and air that were filled with symbols and magic labels. As soon as Klein emerged from his hiding place, Mr. A opened his eyes and looked in his direction. His pupils were dyed with blood, and an extreme madness was contained within his cold eyes. If it were any other Beyonder, they would have subconsciously looked away, not daring to look him in the eye. But Klein, who had faced the eternal blazing sun and met Blasphemer Amorn, wasn't afraid of this. Calmly pulling the trigger, he sent a silver demon-hunting bullet engraved with many patterns flying towards the altar. Witnessing this scene, Mr. A subconsciously wanted to raise his hand, but he stopped in the end. He watched indifferently as the silver bullet drilled into the layer of light surrounding the altar. Silently, the patterned demon-hunting bullet melted and disappeared under the layers of radiance, engulfed in untold resentment and negative emotions. In the end, it completely disintegrated, leaving not a single trace of it behind. Klein's pupils shrank as he shot the rest of the revolver's bullets. The pale golden purifying bullets and the bronze exorcism bullets shot out, piercing through the radiant barrier one after another. However, they disintegrated in the same way and disappeared without creating the slightest ripple. Mr. A laughed hoarsely. "It's no use, puny worm. The ritual has already officially begun, and with your strength, it cannot be broken or interrupted. Even if you're a sequence 5 Beyonder. But you're also fortunate. You will live to witness the coming of our Lord and be integrated into his body." With that, Mr. A ignored Klein and closed his eyes again, as if he was indeed nothing but a puny worm. The shepherd raised his hands in a gesture of open arms and shouted out in ancient Hermes, "The Lord that created everything. The Lord who reigns behind the curtain of shadows. The degenerate nature of all living things. Your devout believers pray for your coming. I am willing to offer my body as a vessel to bear the burden of your great will." Amidst the prayers, a light from an unknown source appeared above Mr. A's head, completely enveloping him. The grievances and negative emotions that were gathered around Mr. A surged into his body like a tidal wave. Bang! 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 Klein snapped his fingers repeatedly and used flame controlling, trying his best to attack the altar, but they still couldn't resist being disintegrated against the barrier of light. What can I do? All my other mystical items are above the grey fog. To take them out, I need to hold a ritual, which would waste at least a minute or two, and a body without protection would be very dangerous. What shall I do? Klein rationally stopped his attempts and stood there, his mind racing. Furthermore, whether it was the sun brooch, the biological poison bottle, the all-black eye, or the Dark Emperor card that raised his level, none of them seemed capable of breaking through the altar's barrier. Is waiting for Miss Justice's call for reinforcements the only thing I can do? Or do I just watch helplessly as the true creator descends? Klein tensed up, his thoughts rapidly flying through his mind. He quickly considered the corresponding strategies. As he considered each and every item on his body, his palms unconsciously broke out in cold sweat. Suddenly, he thought of something. Without having time to think about the consequences, he reached into his pocket and grabbed something that felt metallic. Tap! 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 Klein took a few steps forward, jerked his arm hard, and threw the object in his palm at the altar. With a flash of bronze, the object entered the barrier of light. It was an ancient, simple key. It was the master key. Within the barrier of light, the brass master key began to decompose and melt. And when its outer shell disappeared, the curse that was hidden within it appeared, connecting to the unknown area where Mr. Dorr was. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall. Audrey stood by the full-length window and worriedly looked into the distance. She saw that the fog on the horizon was gradually thickening, turning a pale yellow that was dyed iron black as it slowly spread in her location. There's something wrong with that. The huge golden retriever, Susie, sat beside her and also looked at the commonly seen haze. Yes, I hope it can be stopped in time. Audrey didn't know what the fog represented. She silently prayed to the goddess and Mr. Fool that they wouldn't let the primordial demoness descend. Suddenly, she noticed that the branches outside the window were beginning to shake and the glass was slightly rattling. A wind is coming. Audrey felt inexplicably happy. Sherwood Borough, Holy Wind Cathedral. Terrifying storms that were visible to the naked eye suddenly appeared outside of it, and then they surged towards the east in an unimaginable hurricane. Whoosh! The thick, accumulated fog was blown away, and the rich yellow and iron-black colors quickly faded away. Whoosh! Dried branches fell to the ground as dust and dirt rose into the air, following the fog into the distance. Whoosh! Many of the pedestrians had their hats separate from their heads, and their bodies swayed so much that they had to hold onto trees or walls. The sailors in the dock area felt as though they had returned to the port city and were witnessing a typhoon. The smoke in East Borough and the factory district thinned, and the healthy population felt relieved of their slight discomfort. Boom! Boom! Lightning leaped and thunder rumbled. They soon subsided, and a downpour began to cleanse the land. The Church of the Lord of Storms reacted rather quickly this time. It also has to do with us bringing the operation forward and not being fully prepared. Those in the middle class and the tycoons would have shared the same fate in this great smog as the commoners if it wasn't for the respective protection they received. They would all be lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Lady Despair sat on a rental carriage as she leisurely heard the pattering of the rain on the glass windows. Even though her plans had been ruined in a timely manner, the haze from before had caused more than 20,000 deaths according to her calculations. Furthermore, there would be the subsequent spread of the plague. With this, I've pretty much digested most of my potion, but this is just a benefit I received as a matter of convenience. With large numbers of the population being wiped out, all this points to the Aurora Order and to the true creator. No one could guess what the royal family really plans on doing. It's time I leave, along with the true creator. Lady Despair thought while in a good mood. Her whereabouts were kept secretive, and she had taken care of everything beforehand, therefore, she didn't have to worry about being surrounded by Backlund's demigods at all. By the time they found traces of her, she would already be far away from the city. Just as the Lady Despair was about to leave the carriage, her vision blurred and she saw a figure appear before her. The figure sat across her. It was a young woman in a hooded classical robe, with black eyes and hair, and a beautiful but dull face. Get the latest chapters on no/velbin.com. After throwing out the master key, Klein held Isaac's copper whistle, then he held his breath and waited for the results. If things failed to develop as he imagined, with the altar's barrier remaining intact, he planned on using Isaac's copper whistle to see if he could get any help from the messenger. If that still failed, he would go above the grey fog and use all the items like the Dark Emperor card. He had to attempt every possibility until the very last second. At this very moment, there was no crimson moon, let alone a clear full moon, since it was afternoon. Therefore, Klein didn't have enough confidence in the curse contained within the master key, and he only hoped that the disintegration effects of the altar's barrier would threaten its very existence and cause it to react instinctively, such as communicating with Mr. Door in reverse and transmitting its cry for help to him. In just a second or two, Klein saw the master key disintegrate into the smallest particles of light and an illusory, distorted crimson. The crimson quickly faded as it struggled and then suddenly exploded. In an instant, Klein lost his sense of hearing. He saw the countless figures formed from resentment and indignation all raise their heads and scream. They rapidly transformed, tinged with a blackish green, and grew a second skull, a third eye, or even a fifth leg. They converged into a torrent and surged into Mr. A's body. Mr. A suddenly opened his eyes, shock and disbelief evident amidst his indifferent blood-red eyes. Soon after, the radiant layer of light surrounding the altar warped and collapsed. Boom! A huge explosion spread out from the center of the altar, setting off a terrifying storm. Crack! The 4 thick stone pillars closest to the blast instantly crumbled, and the distant Klein only had enough time to duck and roll before he was sent flying by the shockwave. Bam! He hit the wall, flattened into a thin sheet of paper. The subsequent wind quickly tore apart that thin piece of paper, scattering it in every direction. Klein himself appeared in the corner, using the walls to withstand the ensuing shockwave. The destruction caused by the master key exceeded his imagination. The curse that had been forcibly melted away really did have an instinctive reaction, as it transmitted Mr. Door's roar, and the voice of this forsaken entity, who was at least at the level of an angel, contaminated the resentment and numbed the despair needed for the ritual. As a result, the altar lost its balance and embarked on a path of self-destruction. The moment the blast calmed down a little, Klein rushed out to confirm the results. The illusionary figure and oppressive feeling in the air had already vanished, leaving behind scattered remnants of the altar. Mr. A had his body leaning forward as he knelt by a collapsed pillar. He was missing an arm, half a face, and a number of organs. His remaining eye was filled with bone-deep hatred. However, his wounds were quickly covered with squirming flesh. After that single glance, Klein didn't hesitate to run. For him, he had achieved the ultimate goal of foiling the true creator's descent. If he didn't leave now, was he, a Sequence 6, going to share a dinner with the shepherd, Mr. A, to welcome the new year? Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 78. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The moment she saw the stranger appear in front of her, Lady Despair materialized a sharp, crystalline ice spear and threw it at her target. Using the force of the recoil, she attempted to break through the back of the carriage and into the street. With regards to this sudden turn of events, she was puzzled at this strange enemy who suddenly appeared. On the contrary, she was very confused and perplexed as to how someone could find her concealed self so quickly. It was no less difficult than destroying a large city or teleporting directly from Baklan to the southern continent of East Balam. But as a sequence for Demoness of Despair, she had developed herself one step at a time from when she was an assassin. She knew that she couldn't afford to be distracted or spout nonsense at such critical moments. It wasn't too late to think about all these matters later. Therefore, she chose to attack directly and wanted to take the opportunity to leave. She could already imagine how the strange woman with black hair and eyes would be frozen in the layers of sparkling light left in the frosty wake of the ice spear's trajectory. She would have to struggle to break through the obstruction in order to have the strength to chase after her. By then, she definitely would have escaped from the street and blended into the crowd. However, the scene she was looking forward to didn't appear. As soon as the crystalline ice spear left her hand, it silently disappeared into thin air. Its whereabouts were completely unknown. Angel. The demoness of despair's eyes narrowed as black flames suddenly surged from her body, spreading ailments in a bid to ignite everything around her and causing a large-scale fire. At that moment, her body trembled in a strange manner, and she froze on the spot. She saw her left hand disappear 1 centimeter at a time as it rapidly spread upward in an unstoppable fashion. In her eyes, the beautiful and lifeless eyes of the woman opposite her were dark and serene, as if there was a pure darkness concealed within. "You aren't. You are." The demoness of despair's words came to an abrupt halt. Her entire body was like a sketch that had been quietly erased with an eraser, leaving no trace behind. Her final gaze was filled with fear and despair. The seat she previously occupied was empty, as though she had never sat in it before. The beautiful woman with the lifeless expression pulled the hood of her classical robe, and her lips moved almost imperceptibly as her figure instantly disappeared. On the outskirts of Emperor's Borough, on a trackless public carriage, Triss was sitting quietly in the corner, wearing a veiled hat. She didn't flee with the help of the river by going straight to the Tussock River, nor did she head for the nearest railroad to catch a train, as everyone thought she would. Her choice was to return to Backland. Only in this city with a population of over 5 million, with all sorts of hidden factions and numerous beyonders, would they be able to help her escape the subsequent pursuit of the demoness sect. At this moment, she felt tense, mentally, constantly wary of the terrifying old butler, Funkel. Suddenly, her head spun. When her vision returned to normal, she found herself having magically left the public carriage and was standing on the muddy road outside. Triss's pupils contracted rapidly as she looked around cautiously. Then, she saw a black-hooded figure in a classical robe, and she noticed the black eyes hidden in the shadows. For some reason, it was as if Trissy had returned to being an infant, so weak to the point that she couldn't put up any resistance at all. Cold sweat dripped from her forehead, and although her legs were trembling violently, she was unable to move. This is the scariest enemy I've ever faced. Even the high-ranking demoness I previously met didn't give me such a feeling. Am I going to die here? Is this finally going to end after I persisted in escaping despite failing so many times? A deep sense of despair and uncontrollable sadness filled Triss's heart, making her feel as if she had plunged into her deepest nightmare. Suddenly, a dim blue light flashed before her eyes, removing her curse of being unable to move. Trissy looked forward again, but there was no longer any traces of that extremely terrifying figure. Everything that happened just now seemed like the most realistic illusion. But when Trissy lowered her head, she was surprised to find that the sapphire ring on her left pinky had somehow shattered, losing all of its brilliance. Crack! 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 The remains of the ring and the gem fell off one after another. Klein dodged and rolled around the collapsed stone pillar and the heavily injured Mr. A, who was in the process of healing, and he ran for the entrance opposite him. As for the characteristic fragments which were slowly gathering from the remains of the master key, he didn't even take a glance at them, afraid that he would give Mr. A enough time to stop him. He was well aware that even if he had all his mystical items and was well prepared, he wouldn't necessarily be a match for the shepherd, not to mention the fact that he was only equipped with Azic's copper whistle and 3 types of beyonder bullets. He didn't even have a single match left. Even though Mr. A was seriously injured, Klein didn't dare to take the risk. He had heard that the Rose Bishop, the sequence prior to Shepherd, was extremely proficient in flesh magic. Its healing ability was in no way weaker to his ability of transferring his wounds. Creak! He pulled open the heavy door. The natural light outside shone in, and the clouds in the sky were tinged with a thin yellow, and the sun was pale and dim. Klein rushed out and found that he was in the middle of a mountain. He was surrounded by towering mountains that made the area extremely hidden. Tap! 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 He frantically ran and wasn't even taking the mountain trail. Instead, with his skills as a clown, he ran down the steep slope, occasionally tumbling, and occasionally swinging up with the help of trees. Splash! He heard the crashing of the river. It was up ahead, just below him. But at that moment, a strong gust of wind blew over, sweeping towards his back. Klein made a prompt decision. His knees buckled and he rolled to the side. Sue! 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 The location where he was originally standing and the direction he was moving in had a deep ravine carved out by the wind blades. Mr. A dropped out of the wind, his body still draped with a cape squirming with fresh blood. He pointed with his finger, and immediately, chunks of flesh flew out and swelled up in mid-air before suddenly exploding. Boom! Drops of blood and bits of flesh flew in every direction as Klein cartwheeled with his hands, dodging most of it before finding shelter behind a huge tree. The projectiles bored bloody holes through the huge tree. Traces of corrosion began spreading in every direction from the affected area. Back when Klein was running, he had already loaded his revolver. He was about to raise his hand and shoot Mr. A in the eyes when he saw a deep darkness appear within them. All of a sudden, Klein knew that, although the scenery around him hadn't changed at all, he had been forcefully dragged into a dream. He had once killed a nightmare at least. Klein maintained his consciousness and saw Mr. A phase to his side in a manner inconsistent with logic, turning into a blood-red blanket that enveloped him in a manner that couldn't be escaped from. You want to rely on nightmares to scare me to the point of stopping my heart? A thought flashed in Klein's mind and he responded. This was his dream. The lucid him could conjure anything. Thus, a pure and dazzling golden sun appeared. Clear and blazing flames ignited everything in its surroundings in an instant. Klein imagined the scene when he first saw the eternal blazing sun during the dream divination. Almost at the same time, he left the dream and heard a muffled grunt. Mr. A took a step back, 2 streams of blood running from the tip of his nose. The robe formed from flesh and blood began to slowly flow as though it was melting. Pa! Klein snapped his fingers and ignited the trees about 30 or 40 meters away. Beneath his feet, the long withered weeds caught on fire, and the soaring flames enveloped his body. Mr. A's originally unmanly beautiful face suddenly turned even more beautiful and feminine. A crystalline and weightless ice spear materialized in his hand as he threw it towards the burning trees a few dozen meters away. As soon as Klein jumped out of the flames, his pupils reflected the transparent tip of the spear. The tip of the spear became bigger and clearer, filling his eyes. Klein threw himself to the side as his body became covered with a thin layer of frost. The transparent spear then extinguished the flames, allowing the thick layer of ice to quickly spread in every direction. Klein, who was still in midair, suddenly curled up into a ball, turning his body upside down. He stretched out his left hand and lightly pressed on the layer of ice. He once again rose into the air and left the cold world. However, the skin on his palm was frozen at the point of contact. This resulted in him tearing off his skin with a ripping sound. Rolling to his feet, Klein reached into his pocket and pulled out a self-made slumber charm. As he was about to say the incantation, his nose suddenly started to itch and he sneezed. Achoo! 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 His head ached and he kept sneezing, leaving him with no strength to fight back. I fell sick? I became infected by some sort of ailment? The moment Klein realized this, he felt countless threads that were difficult to be seen by the naked eye twirl around him, wrapping him up like a mummy in a certain sense. He wasn't unfamiliar with this kind of experience. He knew that this was the beyonder powers of a demoness of pleasure. Back then, he had relied on the use of charms to cause all parties to fall into a deep slumber. Then, relying on his uniqueness, he escaped the effects of the charm. But now, Mr. A had maintained a distance of about 20 meters. However, Klein was no longer just a clown. The fingers he could still move snapped and made a crisp snapping sound. In an instant, all the spider silk around him was ignited, as if it had turned into a giant torch. Klein had just jumped out of the scarlet flames when he started sneezing again, which was then followed by a fit of violent coughing. This automatically prevented the use of many of his beyonder powers. At this moment, the feminine gentleness of Mr. A's face disappeared, adding a little more dignity to his loftiness. He stretched out his right hand and clenched it lightly. Klein suddenly had an inkling that if he ran, he would only be running in circles. Mr. A, who was wearing a blood-red robe, revealed a cruel smile. An ancient book that was transparent and illusory appeared in front of him. An ethereal, high-pitched voice rang out, "I came, I saw, I record." Find updates on no/velbin.com. Achoo! Cough. Cough. Klein wanted to hide, but he was powerless. At that moment, he experienced, in an unprecedented manner, the power of a shepherd. It was truly worthy of being called the most comprehensive, most flawless, and most powerful beyond a sequence under the level of a demigod. Even if he hadn't made any preparations, with many mystical items being unusable, for him to be suppressed to such a state without being able to fight back, it implied that there were many problems. Lord of the Mysteries chapter for 79. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The old butler, Funkel, was fleeing across a barren field in the wilderness. He had lost his hat, his neatly combed grey hair hung in an unkempt manner, and the outer layer of his clothes were muddy. Huff. Puff. He paused for a moment, panting as he looked behind him. He felt slightly more at ease when he realized that there was no one around. However, when he turned his head and was about to change direction, he discovered that a figure had appeared in front of him. The figure wore a hooded, classical robe, its face was dull and expressionless while its black eyes were hidden in the shadows. Funkel's pupils constricted. He opened his mouth and tried to say a word in ancient Hermes, but he was surprised to find his nose disappearing and his voice gone. A look of despair suddenly appeared on his face. Then, like a stain in the void, his entire body was seemingly wiped clean with a cloth, and not a single trace was left behind. Achoo! Achoo! Cough. Cough. In the face of Mr. A's looming attack that spelled certain death, Klein was infected by an illness. His headache and fever made it difficult to use flame controlling or flaming jump. At that moment, he couldn't even produce air bullets. Fear of the unknown took over his mind. The clown's intuition for danger saw himself split into the smallest particles of light, perhaps taking away any chance of him reviving. In an instant, Klein reached into his pocket and took hold of an object. This was his answer to the most dangerous situation he could think of ahead of time. No matter what kind of situation he was suddenly placed in, a magician had to be prepared to a certain extent so that he wouldn't panic in the middle of a battle. Klein took out Azic's copper whistle, brought it to his mouth, and blew hard over the sneezing and coughing. Without any stirring motions, he saw, through his spirit vision, a geyser of white bone spewing out as they rapidly sketched out the appearance of a huge messenger with black flames burning in its eye sockets. And at that moment, the pages in the book in front of Mr. A stopped flipping, and the distant voice suddenly came to a halt. A misty green brilliance surged out, and the bone messenger, that was almost 4 meters tall, cracked and crumbled into countless specks of pure light. Behind it, the force that had caused Klein to go in circles was the first to crumble. The figure in the black double-breasted frock coat was then enveloped, turning into a statue made of yellow sand, which was blown away by the wind. However, the scattered sand were white spots, as if they were shreds of paper that had been torn to the limit. Klein's figure appeared on the other end, genuflecting and coughing uncontrollably. If it wasn't for the skeleton messenger blocking the blow for him, then he wouldn't have been able to suppress his ailments and use paper figurine substitute. And after that ordeal, his illness worsened to the point of him losing almost all forms of resistance. At that moment, Mr. A, who had failed in his fatal blow, suddenly coughed in a way more violent manner than Klein. He fell to the ground in pain, blood frothing at the corners of his mouth. Cough. 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 He coughed out a pile of fragmented organs and squirming flesh. Then, with great difficulty, he opened his mouth and attempted to lick them back into his mouth to forcefully consume them. What's going on? Klein was stunned for a moment. But that didn't stop him from resisting a cough, raising his right hand, and aiming the revolver at Mr. A's head. At this moment, he vaguely understood something. While Mr. A's injuries could be treated with his flesh and blood magic, the impact and backlash on his mind and spirituality couldn't be nullified through this method. Mr. A should have switched to another beyonder power to slowly heal the damage to his spirit body, but he was driven by hatred. He forcefully suppressed his injuries and chased after Klein. Thus, after continuously using the beyonder powers that exceeded what his body could bear, his situation worsened and the latent problems flared up. Bang! 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 Klein fired all the bullets in the revolver. Bronze, pale gold, and silver beams of light quickly crossed the short distance between the two of them. Unfortunately, he was unable to control his sneezing and coughing during the process. The bullets didn't all hit Mr. A, with only 2 of them hitting Mr. A, and one of them drilling through his forehead and the other into his torso. Sizzle! A sizzling sound rang out, but Mr. A's head seemed to be boneless. It was just a combination of a pile of rotten flesh. This caused the pale golden-colored bullet to sink deep into his body. It quickly came to a stop and failed to deal lethal damage. All it did was emit a golden radiance of sunshine. Mr. A lifted his neck, and the flesh around the hole in his head writhed wildly. He wasn't dead, not even seriously injured. He was once the tenacious Rose Bishop. Seeing this, Klein made up his mind. He turned around and ran, no longer making any attempts to attack. As for Mr. A, he was panting, and when he lowered his head again, he licked the bits of fragmented flesh and organs he had coughed up. Amidst the wheezing and coughing, Klein ran in random directions, occasionally rolling. Finally, he fled to the edge of a cliff which was over 50 meters away. Beneath the cliff, the slightly turbid Tussog River surged incessantly. It was wide but calm. Klein didn't hesitate and put strength into his legs and jumped. He plummeted, feeling the weightlessness of a free fall. His body tore through the air as he attempted to adjust his posture in midair, transforming into a standard diving motion. Cough. Achoo. His ailment stopped his 3.5 flips midway, and the positioning of his body and palms failed to be in the correct stance. With a splashing sound, he struck the water surface, reducing into a thin piece of white paper. The paper figurine quickly became moist, half sinking and half floating. At the bottom of the river not far away, Klein's figure formed as it shivered a little. His clothes were already soaked, as were the remaining paper and bills in his wallet. After distancing myself from Mr. A, the ailment has abated, Klein thought with a lingering sense of fear. If his coughing and sneezing hadn't subsided at the last minute, he wouldn't have even had the time to use paper figurine substitutes, and he would have suffered internal bleeding and instantly died. Of course, if he died in such a manner, he felt that he had a chance of being resurrected. While kicking his legs to keep himself afloat, Klein created an invisible, hollow tube in his mouth, allowing it to rise out of the water and bring him fresh air. This was the underwater breathing performance of a magician. Klein sucked in with his mouth and blew out through his nose, not letting the turbid gas he breathed out pollute the pipe by directly entering the water. At the same time, he stealthily made his way to the shore, hoping to avoid Mr. A's subsequent pursuit. Unfortunately, this isn't a city. The powers of a faceless cannot be used effectively. Otherwise, once I break away, Mr. A definitely wouldn't be able to find me. While swimming, Klein instinctively had this thought. This resulted in him thinking of a problem, and that was the wind-controlling beyonder power Mr. A previously had. Generally speaking, this belongs to the pathway of the Lord of the Storms. For this pathway, apart from the wind, there's also water, which means they're especially effective for underwater activities. Underwater activities. Shepard is so all-round and terrifying. Klein's heart almost stopped beating as the thought flashed through his mind. He suddenly swam upstream, no longer concealing himself. As soon as he emerged from the water and approached the shore, he saw Mr. A's devilishly beautiful face, covered with fish scales and gaping gills. Mr. A, who was floating on the water surface in his bright red robe, had the corners of his mouth curled up. His eyes were filled with true hatred. Fight! I can only fight! I'll try to hold out until the church's reinforcements arrive or for Mr. Isaac to escape his predicament. Without hesitation, Klein, who had gained reprieve from his ailments, raised his right hand, ready to snap his fingers. At this moment, the two of them simultaneously looked at the sky as though it was an instinctive reaction. A beautiful feminine figure was quickly outlined. The figure was hooded and in a dark robe, its eyes looking blankly at Mr. A. Then, Klein saw Mr. A being quickly erased as though he had become a pencil drawing, wiped out rapidly with an eraser, leaving nothing but his look of indignation and despair amidst the blankness and madness etched into his mind that was the only audience present. This? What kind of level is this? What kind of strength is this? The moment Klein thought about it, he saw the figure turn to look at him. It was a beautiful face, but it didn't have the slightest expression. Its black eyes were deep and dark, devoid of spirituality. Just when Klein's heart was beating rapidly, thinking that he would disappear without a trace, without a clue as to whether he could be resurrected, the corners of the woman's mouth slowly lifted into a smile. A smile? Klein was stunned, wondering if he was dreaming. Before he could regain his senses, the figure instantly faded and disappeared from where he was. The sound of water splashing around him echoed in the air. Puzzled, Klein swam to the shore and got out of the water. Looking around, he found that this place was unusually remote. There were no roads or living people. Only the slightly turbid river water continued flowing in an unchanging manner. It ended just like that? Mr. A died just like that? Who was that lady just now? She was so strong that Mr. A didn't even have time to scream. And she smiled at me. Smiled? Maybe it's a she? However, other than figures at the level of the Pope, how could there be angels walking on the ground from the three churches? Furthermore, a figure on the level of Pope obviously wouldn't be in Backland. Klein couldn't believe that he was out of the danger zone. After a moment of contemplation, he finally felt a sense of reality. She should be a powerhouse sent by the churches. She arrived in time and successfully saved me. If I hadn't informed Miss Justice ahead of time, then they might not have taken such timely action. There would have been a high chance of me dying at Mr. A's hands, with the possibility of resurrection being a question. Yes, it also has to do with me persisting on, dragging on the battle all the way until this moment. Not bad at all. With a sigh of relief, Klein began to look for a way out. Exile. The man with the gold mask pointed at Azikegas and threw his figure into the void, a spot no one knew. Then, he turned around to face St. Sangwell, who was looking at him with a frown. There's no time, we can't finish him off that quickly. We have to hide this area as quickly as possible. Do you want the church to discover our secret? The man with the gold mask growled angrily. Zangwell put away his doubts, nodded, turned to 0-08 which had stopped writing, and grabbed it. His figure was faltering somewhat, and by his legs were piled pants that had nearly been ripped apart in the middle of the battle. Inside Red Rose Manor, Prince Edisac sat by the full-length windows with an abnormally vacant look in his eyes. Your Highness, please hurry. A voice sounded beside him. Edisac's eyes turned spirited as he took a breath, picked up the revolver on the table, and pressed it against his temple. Inside it was a bullet that obliterated spirit bodies. He turned his head and looked longingly out at the golf course and the strolling horses. Bang! He pulled the trigger. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter for 80. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. In the hall where the stone pillars had collapsed, a group of nighthawks wearing black windbreakers and silk hats appeared around the altar. The person leading the team was the Archbishop of the Church of the Evernight Goddess, St. Anthony Stevenson. It was disrupted by someone? He muttered without stopping and directly walked to the stone door that led to the interior. Rich darkness surfaced as the stone door silently opened. St. Anthony led some of the nighthawks in as they delved deeper. Along the way, they didn't discover a single guard or anything of value. It was as if this place had been forcefully swept clean. Finally, they reached a room in the deepest recesses, but there was nothing there but walls and stone pillars. The blue door of light, which was there when Klein left, was long gone. The lanterns in the nighthawks' hands suddenly lost their light, and darkness enveloped the room. When everything returned to normal, they found that the surrounding walls had somehow melted away. However, there were no hidden doors or tunnels behind them. It was either a thick layer of mud and rocks or the corridor they came from. St. Anthony was silent for more than 10 seconds before saying, "Try divination. Search the vicinity." Achoo! Walking through the pathless cliffs and forest, Klein was saddened to realize that he had apparently really fallen sick. The residual effects of Mr. A's beyonder powers, combined with the fact that he was drenched during winter, gave him the shameful cold. However, he didn't dare to stop to collect dry twigs to light a fire and dry his clothes and money. He was afraid that the beyonders of the church would find him. Even though he had already gained the endorsement of Stanton Isengard from the machinery hive mind and obtained the status of a semi-official, this was a matter involving the primordial demonis awakening and the true creator's descent, two cases of the highest order. Therefore, he was bound to be subjected to rigorous investigations, have tea sessions with the machinery hive mind, mandated punishers, and nighthawks to recount the whole process actively or passively. There were two major pitfalls to this. One was that he knew people inside the Nighthawks, and although Detective Sherlock Moriarty looked quite different from the martyred Klein Moriarty, making it impossible to identify him via photographs, he had zero confidence if things were done face to face. 2. Because of similar pathways, the Church of the Evernight Goddess wasn't very friendly to people and things related to death. Back in the Pale Era at the end of the Fourth Epoch, death had fallen under the siege of the Seven Gods, and Sherlock Moriarty had summoned a powerful descendant of death at the critical moment. This wasn't a problem that could be explained away easily. That high-level powerhouse was rushing to deal with Zangwill and 0-08, so she didn't have time to bother with a friendly small fry like me. However, I can't be careless as a result. I should flee when it's necessary. Yes, I can write to the machinery hive mind when I have a chance, stating the second reason as to why I have to temporarily leave Backland. This way, I might still have a chance to work with them in the future. Of course, I have to secretly observe to see if the machinery hive mind has any strong enmity towards any descendants of death. I wonder how Mr. Azik is doing. Perhaps Sherlock Moriarty might be dead in the official announcement. He sure lived up to his name and identity. Follow the latest novels on no/velbin.com. As quickly as possible, Klein tried to find a small town and blend in with the crowd while enduring the alternating fever and cold. Only in human society could the faceless powers be fully expressed. The woman who was working with Mr. A should be a demoness. She went to East Borough. From the looks of the ritual, there must have been a large number of deaths over there. I wonder? With the spiritual intuition of a seer, Klein's heart suddenly felt heavy. At this moment, all the colors in front of his eyes turned saturated, as if they had been sprinkled with oil by a deity. The feeling was over instantly, and Klein found himself far away from where he had been, with the bronze-skinned, soft-featured Azik Eggers appearing next to him. "Mr. Azik, are you unhurt?" He couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. "I am," Azik replied frankly before smiling, "but to an undying, this isn't a big problem." Klein calmed down and asked, "What happened to Zangwill and 0-08? Zangwill is still alive, and he still wields that Grade 0 sealed artifact," Azik said as he walked. Klein tried hard to follow him as he couldn't help but sigh. "What a pity." "Don't worry about it, he was severely injured," Azik solemnly said. "And most importantly, we know that he was secretly cooperating with the royal family, so we don't have to worry about not being able to find him in the future. This way, you can focus on improving yourself, and I can also try to go to a few places that I've recalled, to awaken more memories." Your luck isn't bad. I've been secretly observing the people from MI9 and the royal family to confirm Zangwill's whereabouts. One of the most important places was Red Rose Manor, so I've always been wandering around the area. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to rush over to save you so quickly. Klein immediately felt a little awkward when this was mentioned. "Mr. Azik, aren't you puzzled as to why I didn't die? I often wake up after entering a coffin as well." "This is something that I previously recalled," Azik said with a smile, completely unfazed by the matter. "And in my incomplete memory, although it's rare in others, it's not without precedent. He often wakes up after entering a coffin." "Often?" Klein suddenly realized that the problems that he was worried about were nothing in the eyes of a real powerhouse. As expected of an undying of the death pathway. Well, Mr. Azik had mentioned that he had been in this sequence for a long time, which means that he has long advanced. Klein thought for a moment, then he asked with concern, Mr. Azik, wouldn't Zangwill discover that I'm Klein Moretti? He was afraid that Zangwill would take revenge on Benson and Melissa. Unlikely. At most, he would believe that we knew each other long ago, or that you're my informant if we use the terms that the police uses. Azik recalled and said, but that grade 0 sealed artifact might notice it, but you don't have to worry. Why? Klein pressed. It was unknown what Azik had remembered, but his expression suddenly turned strange. It was as if he wanted to laugh, but at the same time, he felt horrified. That grade 0 sealed artifact will keep attempting to write down the death of its owner. This is likely to be intrinsic to it and cannot be changed. Therefore, I doubt it would actively divulge such important information that can put Zangwill at a tremendous advantage during such a critical moment unless it involves something that it cannot avoid or explain. Seeing that Mr. Azik was so sure about it while producing such strong justifications, Klein exhaled. It was as if he had recovered a little from the cold. Seeing this, Azik added, it's best if you leave Backland for the time being. Zangwill might use that grade 0 sealed artifact to seek revenge again, using your fake name. As long as you aren't in Backland, it should be fine. That grade 0 sealed artifact's sphere of influence doesn't exceed a large city. Just as I had predicted, there's a limit to its sphere of influence. Otherwise, Zangwill could have easily hidden in a small town in the southern continent and leisurely arranged the fates of all his targets without having to worry about anyone finding him. Klein asked after some deliberation, a short trip to Backland for a day or half a day is fine, right? With the premise that I've changed my identity and looks. With that, he rubbed his face, instantly reverting back to his appearance back in Tin-Gen. Azik's eyebrows twitched, and he nodded. It's fine. He turned his head and looked into the distance of the spot that he could no longer see. It seems like I've been targeted by a powerful existence of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. It's best if you don't stay by my side, or you might be implicated. They're very interested in the beyonder characteristics related to death. Yes, I plan on heading out to sea. While I digest my potion, I'll be seeking mermaids. It's a condition for my advancement, Klein explained his plan. Azik tilted his head. Mermaids? Could a mermaid in the form of a dead spirit work? I can find at least 4. Probably not. Klein reached out and wiped his forehead. His intuition told him that it was definitely impossible, but he planned to divine it above the grey fog to confirm it. Without mentioning the dead mermaid again, Azik said, if there's anything, then contact me through the messenger. Messenger. Klein suddenly felt guilt-ridden and ashamed. I had died in my battle with Mr. A. It saved my life. Azik gave him a glance, shook his head, and laughed. Don't worry about it. As long as it isn't killed by a powerhouse at the level of an angel or via some special method, then as long as the underworld still exists, it can slowly be reborn there. And before that, I have similar messengers numbering. I don't know how many there are either. It sounds like there's an army of such powerful and humongous messengers. Klein turned agape, unable to say a word. His shame faded, and he asked curiously, Mr. Azik, where is the underworld, or in other words, hell? The spirit world. To be precise, it's a special place that the ancient death created in the spirit world. Azik didn't hide the truth. Ancient death? That should be the ancient god, Phoenix ancestor Greg race. So the underworld belongs to the spirit world. No wonder the basic structure in mysticism is the real world, the spirit world, and the astral world. It doesn't contain the underworld and the abyss. Klein was about to ask a question when he suddenly remembered something and quickly said, Mr. Azik, I obtained a card of blasphemy created by Emperor Razel. It contains the secrets of high sequence beyond us. I believe it can help you recall more things. However, you'll have to wait a while. It's hidden in Backland. Klein didn't mention the bounty, fearing that it would reveal the Tarot Club's secret, the mysterious space above the grey fog, and Miss Justice. Therefore, he could show his gratitude towards Mr. Azik for his help and sacrifice in this tactful way. Aziz looked at him in surprise, but he ultimately said nothing. He nodded and said, "When you get it back, have the messenger bring it to me. I'll immediately return it to you after I study it. Or you can copy the contents and pass it to me." He paused for a moment as if he had thought of something. Then, he took out a glove that was so thin that it looked like it was made of human skin from his pocket and handed it to Klein. "I've already awakened the relevant memories, so I no longer need it. It's an item that pirate rear admiral left behind. I've placed some seals on it so that it wouldn't be hungry. However, every time it's used it will require you to use a human's flesh and soul to feed it, otherwise, it will devour you." Creeping hunger? The remains of a particular shepherd? Klein immediately recalled what the glove represented.